there with you.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Board of Finance regular meeting, April 18th, 2023, and the continuation of the budget hearing from April 4th. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On April 4th, we heard from the public and have since received additional emails from many members of the public. And I want to thank all those who took the time to write or reach out to various members of our board. I was able to confirm with our board that we've had an opportunity to read the emails, and we'll ask the Director of Finance to post them on the website as part of the minutes after the meeting, so the public can also see those. We'll take additional public audience tonight, and we'll ask folks to please state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you have additional comments you want to make after others have spoken, we'll let you come forward and do an additional 3 minutes after that. After public comments, I'll ask board members if they have follow-up questions to staff they'd like to ask, having heard from the public, to answer questions that may have been raised during the public audience. After we close the public hearing, we'll review our quarterly report, and then we'll begin budget discussions and possible motions. It's our hope that we will conclude the budget tonight, but if we don't, we have an additional meeting scheduled for tomorrow. So with that, I will ask maybe Mike, as the newest member, if you could keep time for us on the 3-minute limit. Thank you.
Happy to help. It's like, oh boy, what am I getting signed up for? That I can do.
Okay, and I'll open it up with anyone who would like to speak at public audience. Joan, welcome.
Joan Coe, 26 Whitcomb Drive. The Board of Finance should be aware of the financial issues facing the taxpayers. The stock market is down. There is talk of a recession, and we face inflation with all of our everyday expenses. Increases in revaluations is giving false indications of prosperity. There are serious unintended consequences in arbitrarily increasing the assessments without any models in place to justify the increases. Simsbury will become a ghost town as small businesses can no longer sustain the increases and will leave town. Renters will leave town when the rents become increased and becomes unaffordable. Many houses will be sold at greatly reduced values as the owners can no longer afford the taxes. When a business has their assessment reduced by $1 million, something is terribly wrong. The Board of Finance should bring the assessor to question how she determined these assessments. Many assessment appeals will reduce the tax collections. The free money from ARPA has skewed the taxing model since many of the expenditures cannot be sustained. Social workers for the schools and youth services are budgeted for $700,000 without outplacement for long-term or short-term therapy. Social workers can identify issues with mental health and addiction but do not have the tools to treat the symptoms. Money should be spent for placement centers with psychiatric physicians, psychologists, and others to help people rid themselves of their addiction in a timely manner. The insurance company should make treatment affordable to all socioeconomic groups. Throwing money at social workers who can identify the problems but do not have the tool for long-term benefits. The issues of addiction and mental health cannot be solved by throwing money at social workers without having a placement for therapy. What benefits are derived from a $700,000 infusion of tax dollars for social workers? The $300,000 pickleball courts have been delayed due to environmental issues with DEP. The Simsbury Simsbury Revenue Fund has a shortfall of $180,000. The Board of Finance should review the yearly deficits with the infusion of tax dollars into the Special Revenue Fund when it was initiated to be self-sufficient. The Recreation Department should review the status of the golf course as a town facility, as many of the towns have done with a specialized golf management team to reduce cost. At the present time, there are 16 homes in foreclosure. The town has several schools that are non-taxable and use all our services. However, Westminster School has given the town a stipend each year in lieu of taxes. The Ethel Walker School has gross receipts of $23,360,000 $253,000 and assets of $81,712,401 as stated in their tax filing. The Ethel Walker School should follow the lead of Westminster School and give the town a stipend in lieu of taxes. This is not the time to increase taxes. The Board of Finance should determine the cost-benefit analysis of all projects before entering them into our budget expenditures. I'm asking the Board of Finance to review expenditures in the budget and reduce the budget with no increase in taxes. All of my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch, Twitter at Joan Co., and Facebook. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Joan. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public audience? You could state your name and address, please.
Scrambling today, I'm still editing. Hi, I'm Lori Boyko from 15 Oakhurst Road. I know I spoke at your last hearing, but if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to regale you with accolades about what really amounts to world-class schools. You're all aware of the breathtaking planned renovation of Latimer Lane and recent renovation of Henry James Middle School. Our teachers from the earliest years through high school graduation are magnificent, and our administrators and staff throughout the district are really top-notch. We are truly fortunate to have such dedication to learning in this community. Our high school boasts a curriculum with the breadth and depth to rival many colleges. The Simsbury High School program of studies, in addition to the classic English classes and familiar math track, offers 6 classes in each of four world languages: French, Latin, Spanish, and even Chinese. 5 of each language is offered in 2 different levels. Plus, we offered American Sign Language for a spectacular total of 40 world language classes. 46 different arts and music electives are offered. 3 different levels of architecture, 3 automotive technology, 2 jewelry classes, television production, and 2 fashion design. Even specialized technical theater and aerospace engineering. 58 STEM electives are available, which includes everything from baking and pastry arts to event planning, regional and international cuisines, and sports and entertainment marketing. I could go on, but I have limited time. New classes have recently been added in African American, Black, and Puerto Rican Latino studies. Every student can literally have their own personalized curriculum in a world-class education. It only makes sense that the cost of that would be $82 million a year. The town population, rounded for simplicity, is about 25,000 people, give or take. The student population, depending on year, is a little over 4,000 people. So about 16 or 17% of the school budget is about 70% of our overall budget. Essentially, 70% of our budget is spent on less than 20% of the people in town. Don't get me wrong, I think we run an amazing school district and I value highly strong academics. But I crunched some numbers generalizing I've paid about $150,000 in taxes over my 25-ish years here. Using per pupil averages, it has cost the town nearly $250,000 for each one of my children to be educated here from kindergarten through 12th grade. In total, in education expenses alone, my 3 children, without any particular special education services or without a large number of advanced or specialized classes, have cost the town about $750,000. The town has spent 4 times more than I have for my family's education. From a personal return on investment standpoint, I've hit the jackpot. But from a town distribution of revenue or assets standpoint, everyone else is getting totally ripped off. You might recall last time I mentioned the difference between wants and needs, and we have all of this, but we can't afford an ambulance to save lives. We need to look more carefully at cutting the proposed expenditures and decide what do we want and what do we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
My name is Mike Rinaldi, and I reside, on Pinnacle Mountain Road. 3 days ago and 50 years ago, I came to Simsbury. I I had no idea where Simsbury was. But I had to be within 30 minutes of Hartford. On my call schedule, I needed to be there in 30 minutes. Simsbury has changed in those 50 years. In many ways, it's better. But it's become unaffordable. And that's not because the quality of what we have here, because the cost of what we have here. Decisions have been made over the past 25 years that have not been in best interest of the taxpayer. The problem goes a little more deeper. It's that we are a well-run town. We've had people who were first selectmen and first select women who were not town managers per se, but they ran the town well. There's a member of the Board of Finance who probably is the smartest person in town. She knows more about the management of this town and its finances. And when the town manager left, I doubt if anybody asked her, would you like to sub for 3 months until we get a new town manager? I don't think anybody asked her, but I did. The problem is that of the 3 boards, the only shot we got is right here. These are the people who are going to defend us, the taxpayers. The Board of Selectmen is dysfunctional. The Board of Education, I'm going to be nice, is incompetent. My mom told me, she said, Michael, remember, be nice to people. And if you have nothing good to say about them, say nothing. That's very difficult in this town today. People ask, why don't people vote? Well, the last election, there were 28 seats to be filled. There were 23 candidates. 1 lost and actually got put on a board. That's kind of amazing. When we have a referendum, maybe 7% of the people show up. But this is a highly educated town. 99% have a high school education. 70% have a college degree. 33% have a degree above college, a master's degree, doctorate, or a professional degree. But the town, these are highly educated people. They're not very knowledgeable. They don't know. And why don't they know? Because they're not concerned. They very seldom come to meetings. They very seldom participate in budget hearings. I remember when I first came to town, we had town meetings. They were interesting. We held them at the high school auditorium. There were about 500 seats in that auditorium. They're always filled. And people would talk about the budget. In those days, there were like maybe 8,000, 10,000 people in town.
Dr. Rinaldi, your time's up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We can
Well-
have you come back after everyone's
Well, no, what I like to tell you is that you're our only shot. These budgets are inappropriate. They're too high. And we need at least a 1 mil cut, which means $3 million. Somebody's got to give it up, whether it's the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen or a combination of the two. We need $3 million. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rinaldi.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Dave?
Good evening. Again, David Bush, 4 Catherine Lane, also chairman of Park and Rec. Feels like deja vu. I think I was up here pretty recently saying the same thing I'm going to say tonight. But it's important. That's why I'm back to say more, is we really need to preserve the opportunity that we have to take care of things that we've acquired. In the Park and Rec department, you guys have done a great job We have funded things like Ethel Walker Woods and the acquisition of Meadow Woods and put more ball fields in play. But we got to take care. If we're going to get these things, we got to take care of them. The Park and Rec Department simply wants to get staffing levels back to what they were in 2005 and 2006 by adding back in this park maintainer. This is not a new position. This is a position that was taken away some 15, 20 years ago that needs to be brought back in. And the idea that, well, we don't have the money, we're never going to have enough money. Nobody wants to see tax hikes, but you got to take care of the things that you decided, the Board of Selectmen decided, the town decided was important to them. Because if you don't, there's no point in acquiring those assets, but it's too late now, can't give them back. So please, this is a position that we've waited for years. It is a position supported by the master plan that the town funded. If you're going to get a 10-year master plan, listen to what the experts had to say. And they said we're understaffed. So please, of all the positions that you might have to consider cutting, do not make it the park maintainer. You're just simply bringing us back to staffing levels we've had for years. Thanks, good luck, and by the way, thank you very much. You have supported the sign program and the playground program, and if you go around town, you can see the difference. So that's smart money, but also thank you. You have funded us. We recognize that. We're just always here asking for more. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? I'll ask 3 times. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? And a final time. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay, with that, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So move. Yep, second.
Anybody want to come back and speak again?
I-
You've already asked.
Yeah, no one else wants to speak again. Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have now closed the public hearing. We are, some people may wonder why we're doing the quarterlies before we go to the budget motion. And the reason is the quarterlies are going to show us year-end projections, and that will enable us to understand what resources the town has to use as we consider budget adjustments and taxpayer relief. And so that goes to reserve level and what we anticipate if there are going to be any overages at the year end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to sort of walk us through what she's presented in our budget books. And if you could start with the big picture, what does the year end look like in terms of expenditure savings and revenue excess?
So I'll start with revenues, as I typically do. If we go down to, in your packet, page 4 at the bottom of the page, I can't capture the full document on the screen, so just you if you wanted to follow along. So currently we're at about 113 million of revenues, or about 98.31% of budget. Compared to the same time last year, 98.14%, so we're pretty much in line with where we were last year. The projections through the end of this year, anticipated to be, excuse me, revenues of about 116,427,000, and this is above and beyond budgeted expenditures by about 1.3 million. So a couple of the highlights that I wanted to take you through, they're actually noted. But first is our tax revenue. So our tax department has a couple of things associated with it. Typically, we see anywhere between $500,000 to $700,000 in our tax collections by the end of the fiscal year. As you can see in the projection column, it's really only anticipated to be around $400,000 in excess revenue. So there's a couple things going on here. The supplemental auto bills, we had typically seen when we were budgeting, they would be about 17% of our motor vehicle grant list. This year, they're coming in at about 14% of our motor vehicle grant list.
Amy, just for the public, supplemental means someone bought the car later and they're getting billed later.
Right, exactly. Those bills go out in January. And then on top of that, we had about additional $1 million in adjustments during the year. So adjustments are a typical course of business. Cars are sold, cars are bought. They come off the grand list, they go on the grand list. Typically, there was around about 6 million in adjustments last year. There's about 7 million in adjustments this year. So just not seeing the supplemental come in to what we had projected during the last budget. So still going to be over budget for our tax collections, just not to the tune of what we thought.
So what was the numbers are so small, I can barely see them. So what was the total impact, dollar impact on the reduction in motor vehicle collections overall?
Overall,
You said you had $1 million in billing adjustments. That sounded really,
yeah, it's not a dollar for dollar. It's $1 million in the grand list.
okay, that wasn't clear. I was like, $1 million.
Yeah.
$1 million on a
No,
cars.
the tax value, I believe, is about $300,000 deficit.
Okay,
In
and that,
total motor vehicle collections in about 7 million? I don't remember. How much do we collect from the motor vehicle tax?
I don't know offhand. I can look when we go through the levy document. I have it.
so is that number in here, the 300,000 in really, really fine print somewhere that I can't see?
So yeah, so that 100 million in anticipated collections, and then we have
396,
right.
okay.
So then over to the right, we have the projected current year tax collections to come in at $200,000 in excess of budget. And then I noted up here that they typically come in at about $500,000 in excess of budget. So the difference between the two would be your 300,000.
Okay. Here.
And then the other part to the taxes
Let's see the
is our
200.
state funding for motor vehicle reimbursement. We had budgeted the state refund at 29 mils. And then after the budget was passed, the state actually let us use a mill rate of 31.49 mils. The anticipated reimbursement at 29 mils was about $2 million, just shy over. But with the 31.49 mils, we were only anticipated to get a little shy of 1.2 million. So we will not hit our budget on that. However, we do collect additional fees for our motor vehicles. So it does offset. It's just in the state grant funding line, we won't see the additional revenue there.
And is that 31 point whatever mils, is that a permanent, do they change it every year, or is that,
We haven't been notified that they're going to change it.
so that's what we're using for this year's budget estimate?
No, so our mill rate is actually lower, or our anticipated mill rate is actually lower, I believe.
But
So
what they
wherever-
reimburse, is the difference between 31
Right.
and, so since ours is, but I just want to make sure the
Exactly.
31 is what we're using as an assumption.
Right.
Okay.
So what's that total dollar net, positive or negative?
Well, it's a net positive to our budget for the 31.49 because
Yep.
we had
higher
budgeted
amount.
at 29.
So what's that number?
I don't know offhand. I'd have to run it.
So wait a minute, I'm confused because your first sentence here says that we're seeing a decrease compared to budget, but you just said we're seeing more compared to budget?
In the tax collections. So you're seeing here, you're seeing the tax department in total. And I'm just giving you the detail of what makes that up. So the tax collection rate, we're showing a decrease.
It says the tax department is seeing a decrease compared to budget on the motor vehicle state reimbursement allocation.
Right,
So the reimbursement appears in the tax budget line.
right,
Okay, that's,
yes.
I still didn't get that.
but, and with the increased mill rate, does that completely offset the state contribution?
It's in the ballpark. If anything, it's negligible. I think it's about 300,000 if I were to guess. So you're seeing, Linda, on here, it's tax department, but within the tax department, there's several lines within the tax department. There's our current year collections, our prior year collections, our interest and lien fees, our state reimbursement for motor vehicle. So you're just seeing everything trued up in this total.
When Amy does the tax levy, she breaks it down in the actual budget. It's broken
Right.
down.
Okay.
And part of that, Amy, we got a
Very
pilot payment,
poorly
which was
written.
actually a motor vehicle payment. Is that how that worked?
So I touched base with Martin on that because that was confusing to me as well, and it's actually further down here for this 554,000 that's coming in excess for the town manager's budget. So I touched base with Martin because the state motor vehicle payment title changed to a municipal revenue sharing / pilot. But the payment that we received for $500,000, or $651,000, was actually municipal revenue sharing. And I asked how we were able to get that, considering we've never gotten it in any other year. So he let me know that they changed the program for 22 and 23, and then towns were allocated that funding. They have not kept that same program for 24, but that's why we were able to get some of the municipal revenue sharing money in this year.
So is that what you're listing down below as pilot money?
Yes.
Yep.
So it's actually MRS money.
Yep. So there's two. We have our pilot payment, and then the additional funding was from the municipal revenue sharing.
So we don't know if that municipal revenue sharing is coming again. Is that what you just said?
In fact, we think it's not.
Right. In the preliminary estimates from the state, it's not. But we also didn't have any anticipation that we were getting it in 23 either.
But they upped our car reimbursement, the exact amount of the pilot payment, so it's pretty much a swap.
Yeah. That's accurate.
Does this reduction in supplemental affect your assumptions for next year, or do you expect that will go back to 17% for supplementals?
So that's part of the recommendation that we're going to go through later, is recommending decreasing it.
Okay.
And then if we go down to our interest income, we had some substantial growth after September. So our December and March journal entries that were booked, our anticipated year end is almost about 1.3 million in investment income. So we were super conservative on that during the budget, and that's another recommendation that we can make where we can increase that number much higher than it is. I think it's currently at 100,000 or 300,000. So we can look at increasing that as well, based on what was actually coming into us.
So what was the interest rate assumption, and what are you moving it to?
We don't have a specific interest rate assumption. We take a look at whatever STIF is giving us, and then for next year, I just decreased it a little bit down to, I think the recommendation is probably about 800,000, knowing that the interest rates aren't going to keep going up. So I'm just basically taking our actual usage and making an adjustment off of that for next year.
Yeah, so that was my question as well. Next year, why wouldn't, I mean, I don't anticipate interest rates going down, so why wouldn't you take,
They're actually already starting to come down.
well, the Fed's saying they're gonna increase them again, but,
I mean, maybe, but like our bonding market, when we hear from our bond advisor, he's saying that the
Yeah,
interest rates are coming
CDs and
down.
bonds have definitely peaked.
Yeah.
They're going back down.
I think that's it for highlights on revenue, if anybody else has any questions.
just the town clerk. You said that they're coming in
Oh.
under budget, but you didn't say by how much.
So that would be the 119,000. So that's mainly related to our recording fees coming in under budget because of the slowing housing market. Now that the housing boom is starting to level off.
Okay.
Amy, I had a question on Memorial Pool. It's looking like that's bringing in about 20,000 more in revenue than anticipated.
Mhm.
Is that something we can carry over into the next budget and increase revenue in that line item?
I mean, we could. I talked to Tom Taberski earlier. This is from the swim lessons, and he is anticipating doing those swim lessons next year. So unless he has any objections, you can increase that amount if you'd like to.
He's giving us a thumbs up, so let's go. Here's 20 grand.
There's 20. Okay.
There you go. We got a tiny little closer to the $3 million, Dr. Rinaldi.
Okay, so I'll add that to our motions, but if I forget to make that, I'll ask my board to remind me. Okay.
So, Amy, I'm sorry, just to clarify, you're saying we used a lower assumption, and therefore we're just right-sizing that assumption,
For which line item?
interest income?
Yep.
Right.
So even if rates were to come down, you're still lower than, you're higher than what we assumed, maybe even a little bit lower than where interest rates actually are?
Right.
Is that fair? Okay.
Anything else on revenue? Okay. So moving on to expenditures. Again, just a state of the state as to where we are right now at the end of March. We have about 81,700,000 in current year expenditures to date, which is about 70.22% of our current year budget. And compared to the same time last year we were at 70.3%, so very much in line with the same activity as last year. If we go over to our projected through year end, we're anticipated to come in at about 1.1 million to the good compared to the budget. Just pull my notes. You can see as you go through the majority of these accounts, some of the individual line items are showing over budget. This is due to our union contracts that were settled in the current year that had been unsettled for the 3-year period. We had built in a contingency at the end of fiscal year 22 to fund those overages. So there is a contingency line item towards the bottom of your page of about 798,000. So if you take that 798,000 compared to all of the offsets through each of the departments, it's about $400,000 in savings.
400 out of the 700?
And then you'll see that there's a few line items in here that have salary savings from staff vacancies, such as the police department, public works. And then lastly,
Yeah, how much was the public safety one?
yep, it was. So the police department about 168,000, and then public safety in general about 250,000. And then lastly, we had about $200,000 in savings from our ARC payment this year for our pension plans. Any questions on expenditures?
A question on the landfill.
Sure.
That looks like it is coming in under budget by about 20,000 projected. Is that a reduction that can be carried over into the next year's budget?
So I spoke to Tom Roy, and he said that it's not linear from year to year. So that's projection is based on what I'm seeing. He thinks that we could have activity in June where that may not come to fruition. And if it doesn't come to fruition in June, it will likely come to fruition in the summer, so for fiscal year 24. So he is not comfortable coming down on that number, just based on projections through March.
Any other questions on the operating budget expenditures? Okay, and if you want to go on to funds?
Sure. So our Simsbury Farms Fund. Current state of the state, we're about a net income about $419,000 as of the end of March. This is actually super close to where we were at the same time last year. We were about, again, $419,000 to the good at the end of March of 22. Just looking at the projections, a couple of highlights here, the $276,000 for the Simsbury pools. You can see that our projections are about $276,000 compared to our $245,000 in budget. And then our Gulf revenue, as you can see, the same time last year, the $760,000 compared to $690,000 for the same period in fiscal year 22. We're running a little bit ahead. And then so our projections are pretty much in line with where we landed last year, assuming we have some good weather.
So can I interrupt with a question? And so you have almost $1 million sitting in a fund there. And you all know I'm not a big fan of having multiple slush funds around the town when we have a big, rainy day fund already. Can you tell me what your thoughts are on how you would use it and why aren't you using that for some of the things that are in CNR and?
Actually, it's not $1 million.
It's 997.
Fund balance.
Yeah.
So $400,000 we've appropriate, if the budget goes through, is appropriating toward the completion of the irrigation
Oh,
system.
excellent, okay.
So
That's
we-
where
then-
I was going. Like,
And
why
after step
irrigation?
2 of that would be going and
All right,
doing
didn't see
the cart
that.
path paving, all of the CNR projects that we had, the capital projects that we had scheduled for the golf course. We plan on using golf course profits back toward that. And
Okay.
once those are completed, it'd go toward Simsbury Farms projects after that. We do intend to use that fund balance.
Okay, thank you, Tom, I
We have
appreciate
also
that.
asked Amy to propose a fund balance policy for Cultural Parks and Rec and Simsbury Farms Fund, so that we know what our target should be, just like we have for health, just like we have for general reserves. So we anticipate that in July.
I mean, for any time we have a special fund, we should have a policy about, like, if it gets too big, why is it there?
You guys can decide what to do with the excess. Any other questions on the Simsbury Farms? Okay. So then moving on to the health insurance, our last major special revenue fund that we like to keep tabs on. So again, our state of the state for March 31st, 2023, we're currently at a deficit of about 2.9 million. You can see compared to the same time last year that we are excessively in deficit. However, as you may recall, this is a planned deficit that we did during the budget for fiscal year 2023, where we did not increase our contributions into the fund based on our premium rates. So although it may look alarming, it was planned and we are right within where we plan to be. So if you take a look over at the projection side, our estimated loss for the year is about 1.3 million. And then what we really want to take a look at and keep an eye on is our reserve levels, which our advisors always tell us should be at 20 to 25% of expected claims. And if we do land at that $1.3 million deficit, our reserves will be at about 22%. So we're still within that range.
Amy, can you describe the difference between the fund balance and the reserves? Are there two separate things, obviously?
Yeah, so our fund balance is a portion of our reserves, and then the IBNR is the other portion of our reserves. So those two line items together equal the percentage of claims that we should be at, so that would be the 22%.
But we have a fund balance.
So we have our estimated fund
Oh,
balance.
I see, okay, yeah.
Amy, we had talked about, and again, for summer policy about use of reserves, and I think I was going back and looking at the minutes, and our consultant recommended that if we have excess reserves, that you use only a third. So maybe we could work that into the policy.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Amy, sorry, I just need clarification. We're going to go from a negative 3 million to a negative 1.4 million by the end of the year. How do we bridge that? How do we get down to the 1.3 negative from the 3 million negative?
So it's basically made up from our premiums. So our Board of Education, they were originally giving us 12 months of premium for cash flow, but since our reserves in such a healthy level, they no longer have to do that. So instead of using estimates, we use actuals now. So
Okay.
it comes in over 10 months. So it's a little bit, it's catching up.
Skewed towards the end? Okay, thank you.
That's all I have for highlights. If anybody else has any questions on any of their smaller special revenue funds.
Oh, yeah, I did have a couple questions. Let's go to those pages. I didn't dog ear them, I should have. Okay, let's see. The library, page 15, sorry. Just point out, and maybe we'll come back to this later when we're talking about specific programs that got added. There's a $50,000 balance in the library fund, and we have several little requests for book bikes and teen literacy and that sort of thing, and I'm just wondering, couldn't this be used for some of those library programs? What else would this be used for? Why, I mean, it looks like it's kind of healthy there.
Yeah, so this fund, the programs are typically set by the library board. I know that for the book bike funding, the request was put forth through the finance subcommittee for the ARPA funding because it was in line with the intention of the ARPA with the catching kids up in their learning and the literacy and that notion. So that's why the request was put in through the ARPA. If you all are not supportive of that request, then they could go back to their board next month and see if their board would be willing to fund it out of this fund.
Okay, so this fund is available to fund all sorts of different library things.
Right.
It funds special projects. It doesn't fund operating expenses such as material purchases like the tea materials, which was one of the service improvements, and children's programming, which was a service improvement as well.
And why doesn't it fund those things?
Because they're not considered special projects, they're operating expenses that happen year after year after year. It funds special projects such as when we did our reorganization a few years ago, excuse me, and needed additional shelving, it funded the additional shelving. And the Friends of the Library also funded additional shelving.
So just help me understand where the restriction comes from.
The money itself is actually gifts and memorial gifts given to the library.
Yeah.
So they're not earmarked for operational things, they're earmarked for special projects, and that funding is at the discretion of the library board, so all of the
So it's at the
projects-
discretion of the library board?
Correct.
Okay, so all of these things could be deemed by the library board to be special projects. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Oh, yes, thank you. The social services program, we've looked at this a few times. That's page 18. It has a fund balance of $260,000. And only $16,000 spent this year and $20,000 last year. So it's obviously got a lot more inflow than outflow.
Yeah, so we take in a lot more donations than what we are able to spend or need to spend, I should say. So this is something that I had talked to or ran by Lisa when we had met. We have a lot of donations that come into this fund. A lot of them are earmarked for food insecurity, but we have some that come in that are not earmarked. So what I would like to do, I should say, is take a look at what donations are completely unrestricted, knowing that there is coming likely a request for our social worker next year, and possibly help utilize this fund to feather in the cost of the social worker for next year. Or, you know, something else if the social services director would like to do that. But just finding a way to help utilize those funds and bring down that fund balance. But we do need to analyze how much is coming in restricted and how much is unrestricted, because the restricted ones we can't spend outside of the donor's wishes.
And there's no way to find that out sooner rather than later, to find out if some of this could be used in this budget? I know we've asked before.
I don't know. I'd have to ask the director.
Okay. Dial-A-Ride, same thing. They had no expenses last year, 2,000 of expenses this year at a fund balance of 69,000. I know this is also one we've talked about before.
So the Dial-A-Ride is, we only have the passes that we charge going into this fund. And this fund is actually helping to fund the purchase of the next bus. So that fund balance will be spent down.
All right. All right, so it's sort of pre-funding the next bus. I think that was it. Yeah.
I had a couple. The Police Department Community Service Fund has a balance of almost 60,000. What is the plan for that?
Page is that?
Sorry about that. That is page 16.
So part of this is the cadet program. I'm not sure how much of the fund balance is made up of that. And then the other part, grants and donations. I'm not aware of any plans for the use. I don't know if the chief has any insight.
Yes, we have several binders downstairs that funds are earmarked for the Heroes in Town program. We have several thousand in there earmarked for that. And if you recall, that's the program that Mark Rudowitz had put together, shipping supplies off to military canine handlers and their canines around the world. That has slowed down recently, but we haven't received any donations for that in a little while. But that's what those were accepted for. There's other general money in there or funds in there for Project Lifesaver, which was the device that that we can give people if they have a tendency to wander. So it pays for that service. And then we have the cadet program, as Amy had mentioned in there. And then we have also just general donations that people provide to the police department for uses for programs. We've funded in the past part of our Citizens Police Academy program out of that fund as well.
So just full disclosure, I am part of that. I'm taking that class right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that for all of these where we end up with a big balance like this relative to 2 years of spending, that's way less. I mean, I'm not disputing that those are wonderful programs, but you're not spending much money on them and you've got lots of revenue there, and this is a pretty tight year. So if there's a way we can use some of that revenue
Yeah, and
rather than having it sit there and collect dust.
yeah, and I don't recall the amount off the top of my head, but
57,000.
no, like specifically for like the Heroes and Hounds, and
I thought you spent $50 on that so far this year.
yeah, I don't mean the expenditure. I mean the amount that's in there.
That's earmarked.
Earmarked for that, and I can't imagine not using that for anything else but what people had intended that for as a donation.
Right, yeah, no, if it's earmarked, you can't.
Yeah, and the same thing with the cadet program. Recently we just had the donation for the cadets from the Rotary Club to go into that fund as well. That was almost $3,000. So a lot of that is earmarked.
You can take a look at the parts that aren't.
Amy, before we go on to capital, can you talk to us about the Board of Education and projections there?
Yep. So the Board of Education, we had previously reported showing about $700,000 deficit related to special education. We had anticipated that we would be able to cover that deficit within our own budget with some of the excess open choice money that we would be getting. We had a spending freeze, we had a hiring freeze. Took a look at those projections again. We're still around the same $750,000 deficit, and again, still anticipated to close it within our own budget during the year. So that budget should come in within budget.
Are you anticipating having to use any of the non-lapsing fund to close
At this point.
And where are those savings coming from, other than, so Project Choice, we got it more reimbursement because we crossed the 4%.
So open choice, we think that we're getting a little bit more in excess cost, and then we did a hiring freeze, there were open positions, and then we did a spending freeze as well. So textbooks that hadn't been purchased, conferences, training, some of those have been denied, things like that.
And the books will need to be purchased next year, though.
So if they're not purchased at the beginning of the year, they don't need them, so we take that money.
So how much of the deficit do we make up with the spending freeze?
I would have to look, but I think the open choice is about $300,000. Really, the hiring freeze is probably the majority of it, and I would say maybe about $100,000 from the supplies and the conferences, education, things like that.
And then generally, so when we think about what's going to the positive to the town, it's about $1 million in expenditure savings and 1.3 in revenue. So about 2.3 that
Under budget or over, yeah.
to the positive.
Yep.
So, and you're projecting year-end general fund reserves at 16.6. So how much could we transfer to capital reserves and end up with 15.5, which is our current policy?
I think it was about 800,000.
It's only 800,000 transfer. So
So
just,
the 15.5 is the lower end of a range, right?
Yes.
15.5 to 16.5, correct?
yes,
Okay, so that would be the low end of the range, 15.5, just for the public's
Yes.
information.
and that's been our board, is we've said, let's keep it at the low end of the range, and we've taken excess and put it in capital reserves for future needs. And in the past, that has sometimes been 2 million, 2.5 million, but this year it's only going to be 800,000 net, because some of that excess 2.3 will have to stay in the general fund reserves to keep our reserves at 15.5. For members of the public, this is a best practice recommended by the Government Financial Officers Association. They actually recommend 2 years or 2 months of savings in your capital reserve. If you think of a home, you know, your emergency thing, they say 3 to 6 months. For a town, it's 2 months, and that's about 16.5. The rating agencies say 15 to 17.
In your general fund.
In their general fund,
Yeah, you
yes.
said capital
Oh,
reserve.
sorry. Yeah. So that's why when we think about what we can transfer out, we targeted at 15.5 as of right now, and that's been our policy within the range of 15 to 17%. So that's, when we think about the budget and what we can use in capital reserves, we're not going to be replenishing as much as we have in the past. So that's just one thing to keep in mind when we transfer to that. I'm going to recommend to our board that unless folks want to dive into capital, that we save the capital quarterly discussion for our main meeting, just to expedite this meeting, if people are comfortable with that.
Sure.
Okay. Are there any other questions on the quarterly after that? I think Amy, thank you, and to Bob DiCrescenzo, thank you. Members have received council's opinion on the municipal cap. And I request the Director of Finance, Amy, if you could confirm that we are in compliance with the cap, starting with the Board of Selectmen approved budget. And we did get Bob DiCrescenzo to say that were we to exceed it, we would lose municipal revenue sharing, but as of right now, we're not anticipating getting any, and we are in compliance. There was some question about compliance because the cap says you can't go above 2.5% budget increase or the rate of inflation. Those who are following the rate of inflation, it dropped, it's now at 5. So if they use that, we would not have been in compliance, but Amy and Bob DiCrescenzo were able to confirm with the state that they're using 614. So we are in compliance there, but for members of the public who are following it, it's still a big expenditure increase, and certainly above the 2.5. Before we go into Amy sort of walking us through, she's going to start where we are, which our board is fairly familiar with, but the public may not. But I did want to invite preliminary comments from board members, especially if they had any comments on the criteria they'll be using as we go through the evaluation and decision-making process. Would anyone like to speak before we begin budget discussions? Linda?
Yeah. Wasn't sure where you were, what point we were at, but yeah, some of us, the 4 of us who are allowed to get together in caucus have done that, and it's been, I have to say, in 11 years of budgets, that this is my 11th budget. This is the hardest budget I've seen. It's certainly the biggest potential tax increase, and that has made, decision-making difficult, and, we've gotten information sometimes a little later than we would have liked, so we had less time to think it all through, and so I we always have a hard time balancing wanting to meet the service needs of the public, and people love this town because we have great services. As Ms. Boyko pointed out, we've got a great school system. We all want to keep that school system. We want to keep our parks, me in particular, because I use them a lot. And it's really hard making those decisions about balancing the taxpayers' needs, because I've heard from a lot of people, some who have not taken the time to, send us an email, but have stopped me in places and said, I'm not going to bother sending an email. I'm just going to move out. And those things are tough when, on the other hand, you've got people saying, yeah, but I want this and I want that. And I will say we've heard from more constituents this year than ever before in my 11 years of doing budgets with the town. And I'm really pleased about that, because we need to hear from the public. But as Dr. Rinaldi said, many of the members of the public are not tuned in. And I think to some degree we need to make a stronger effort to communicate to the public and get them involved, because they don't understand the trade-offs that we have to make. I do believe our budgets were crafted with absolutely the best of intentions. There are projects in here that are laudable, and there are good goals of what people want to accomplish within their budgets. And that they reflect the fact that there's significant inflation in our environment, and that inflation affects the government just as much as it affects everybody's personal budget. And I think the budget, was a lot of hard work was done by both the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed in their respective roles. But in combination, these two budgets with the debt service that we're now carrying creates a tax increase and a tax level that's just higher than is sustainable, again, as we've heard from some of our constituents. And it's not looking like it's a one-year spike, but that it's going to, go on for a few years. And that's not sustainable to me for not only our local residents, but our local businesses. We've heard from some of the businesses that their property's been revalued at tremendous increases. And on top of that, they're going to be seeing a significant, mill rate increase. And, we want business owners in this town, and I don't want to see them be driven out either. They're important not only for the quality of our life, but for the vibrancy of our economy. So in short, given the, sizable tax increase that we're looking at this year and for years to come, and from the constituents hearing their feedback, we talked a lot about having to make some unpleasant choices and tighten our belts, or we're at risk of driving away, particularly seniors, but also young families who can't afford to move here with these tax levels. As I was looking through, and we all talked through different line items that were newly added, or things that were particularly on the selectmen side, because we get a lot more detail on those. Many of them are little things, but they add up and they add up and they add up to be collectively a lot. And it was really difficult to pick and choose between them. And so I spent time developing kind of an algorithm for myself, just a rule. And I ended up saying to myself, as we go through the list of things that are new expenditures, that unless it's necessary for public health and safety, which I always think of as the government's number one job, is to keep people safe and healthy, or unless it's that failure to do the project is going to create a greater expense down the road for a necessary project, then I'm going to say no to it. So it's not personal against any, particular department. That, believe me, it will be difficult for me to say no to some of the things that I would like to see in the budget. But I just feel like I need to have a rule that's fair and consistently applied. And that rule is, public safety has to come first, and then, economic sense of spend now to spend less later. So I just wanted to preface that so you won't think I'm just Attila the Hun. But it's,
Thank you.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Thank you. Linda, thank you for all these years you've been doing this, and for you to say, excuse me, that this is the most difficult you've had. I've been here much fewer years, but I found it difficult, and I find it sort of disconcerting that probably nobody here is going to go home really happy tonight. And we got to keep our respect, keep perspective, and keep it civil. The authorizers, I think, have done a good job. I mean, we've got a very good police force here. They keep the town safe, and we do not have a lot of the problems we hear about in other towns, and that's commendable. That's what we want. The town government has certainly focused on its priorities. I mean, they may be spending too much than some of us would like in some areas, but you don't come through with wild ideas, and people say, "What in the world is that in the budget for?" And the Board of Education. I mean, we're all dealing with this 4% salary thing, but when you look at it, they punch above their weight. I mean, we've got one of the best education systems. The results are there in the scores. I mean, it's an outstanding education system, and we are a state leader, and we like being there. And the problem is that the sum of all this adds up to something that I've never seen in now my fourth time around of people coming up and saying, "I just can't do it." Businesses are saying, "I'm losing money." And restaurants are saying, "I wanted to make this up when the pandemic ended, and I haven't been able to do it." And people saying, I've got to look at another town if you do this. And what bothers me is that we're going to do this again next year. So I think our mindset has to be civil, but it has to be one that we all have to get used to the fact that we're not going to get all the things that we want to do. Now, I'm not sitting here wringing my hands. That's what public service is all about. That's what you sign up for. You got to make decisions. They're going to be tough, or people will dislike them, but I hope we do that with respect for each other, for the authorizers, and keep in mind the fact that in an unprecedented way, we've heard with people who said, I just can't pay that bill. They're our neighbors. So, all right, town's in good shape. We're doing well, and we got to recognize that they're paying both for the authorizers and for the taxpayer. So thank you for your comments, Linda. I just hope we continue to work constructively, keep it civil, respectively, and get used to it, because we're going to be here again next year. That's it, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all very good points made. Mrs. Boyko's comments definitely resonated with me, and many others, as evidenced by the many emails, more to Linda's point, more than I've ever seen come in, and not necessarily as supportive as in years past. We're the stewards of people's tax dollars. I get comfortable having these conversations with the utmost respect for everybody, all vested parties, including, again, to Mrs. Boyko's point, 25,000 people in this town, not a small component or group. I know a lot of people questioned how I came up with the dollars that I had recommended to the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen to try and look back and to reduce their increases to the tune of $6 million roughly for the Board of.
750, you said, I thought.
Well, no.
No, the total.
No, the
Oh,
total
6 million.
increase
Yeah.
from both boards. I had asked for roughly a 15% reduction in the increase. So that came out to a little bit over $1 million. Dr. Rinaldi, I missed your target by about 60%, but they came back with the Board of Ed at 3% of the increase and no reduction from the Board of Selectmen side. So again, this is context for the discussions that we're going to have. I think the spirit of ARPA, as important as that was, there was originally meant to be an accountability for those dollars, a reporting of those dollars, how they were spent and why they were spent and how it related to, the pandemic. And that's not the case. We're not required in any way, shape, or form to account for those dollars. So while I can appreciate the spirit of those dollars, we saw many emails come in from business owners who are suffering, who have continued to suffer after the pandemic, wondering how they might be able to benefit from some of those ARPA dollars. So in my mind, they're considered reserves. That's all they are to me right now. So the spirit of ARPA, the supplemental appropriations that we saw this year were many more than what we've seen in the past because of ARPA. So I would just like to put the ARPA, discussion to bed and just assume that we're talking about, reserves and really taxpayer dollars. I'm also not supportive of borrowing at higher costs today, because what we bond for today and tomorrow are going to be at higher costs than what we did last year and the year before. I'm not supportive of, borrowing today at a higher rate for certain projects and using reserves to pay off lower cost of debt. To me, that just doesn't make sense. It would make more sense if we really wanted to pay for cash what we're expected to bond for today. So that will also go into my line of thought. At the end of the day, we had, without the reval, we ended up with 2.5% tax growth with a 7% increase in the budget. Math just doesn't work. And to Art's point and to everybody's point here, we're expecting about a 30% increase in the mill rate over the next 4 to 5 years. So what some people might call an egregious increase in their property values, that's going to be the basis for their taxes going forward, and they're only going to see that mill rate bump up against 40 again. So, you know, I give more credit to the townspeople of Simsbury. I don't think it's that they don't know. We've always kind of had that, maybe in the best year, it's 12 to 15%, depending on if there's a broader election on the budget. I think they do know, and unfortunately, more people are likely to vote with their feet, and we've seen that time and time again from the people who either don't have kids in the school or just can't pay anymore. And we've seen that with public comment specifically this year. So that's just a little context for how I'll be thinking about the budget.
Thank you. Bert?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo most of what the other members have said, but you know, I moved to this town 18 years ago, and I used to tell people I felt like I'd moved to the Big Rock Candy Mountain, and I was used to paying taxes in New York City, and what I got for my money here was so obvious and so plentiful that I was just delighted. And I told people who complained about the taxes in those days, my neighbors, I said, you're just spoiled. It's wonderful. And I believe we're getting great stuff for what we pay for. And this year I attended the Board of Education budget workshop and the Board of Selectmen workshop, hoping I would see programs that I obviously opposed or expenditures I thought were wasteful, and everything sounded terrific. I appreciate that a large part of the problems we're facing this year is due to circumstances no one had anticipated and no one caused. We didn't cause national inflation here in Simsbury. We have enormous support for our teachers. I'm one of the people who supports our teachers, and that produced a labor agreement that costs us a lot of money. But really, as we pointed out, if this were a one-shot deal, we could, I could say, you know, bite the bullet, we're getting what we're paying for. But we expect this to go on next year for reasons that are not the same as this year, but are structural to the way our town is working and based on decisions we've made in the past. What I fear is, or what I should say is, I don't want this town to be, or our town government simply to be an institution that delivers amenities and gradually weeds out the people who can't pay for them. We have to think of the town as something other than that, and that includes people who live here now, people who we hope will move into the town. We are a community as part of a larger community, and we have to think of ourselves that way. And when we evaluate individual projects, we have to think of it in that context, that we can't afford everything we want or all the benefits we would like to bestow on current residents. And that's, as somebody who has always been happy to pay his taxes, and I'm lucky enough that I don't feel that I'm going to be driven out of the town. But I don't think that other model of just selling services to the highest bidders as town members or town residents is actually sustainable. I think it causes ultimately we're going to have a town where people move in and send their kids to a school system that, as we heard, offers 40 different languages, and then stop paying taxes again, and that's not what we want. And that's where I'm coming from in addressing this year's budget, and especially addressing next year's budget.
Thank you. Mike?
Lots of eloquent words. I'm unfortunately not going to be that eloquent, as I am not as well spoken as my colleagues. I think for me going forward, this budget has been an eye-opener, and next year I'm going to be pushing for a firm number of guidance. Right, we have been very open in welcoming budgets to come in at whatever they're going to land at. And in the past, firm recommendations have been made in guidance. And so I know that we are going to be talking about a lot of this stuff this summer, and I'm looking forward to that because I want to help shape these budgets before they land in front of us with better guidance to the BOE and the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. So from my perspective, we started this process with the tri-board, and at that point we all saw what we were looking at, and I think it's been eloquently stated, a lot of this has been driven by things not within our control, and at that point I think we all agreed, the three boards looked at it and said, yeah, this is going to be a fixed cost year, except for public safety and state mandates, because it was breathtaking then, and that has not changed from what I've seen during this process. So I'll be looking at the budget through that lens, and I agree with a lot of the criteria that Linda laid out, and would add a few, just to reiterate what Linda said. So I'm going to look at it first through public health and safety, and that relates not only to police and public safety, but also pandemic residual. Whether the deferred maintenance will result in greater cost at a later time. We don't want to do that. Whether the expense will contribute to the vibrancy of the town and our local businesses. Will it help grow the pie? Is that something is it a state mandate? Like I said, is this residual from the pandemic? And I'm looking at the funding mechanism. Is it being funded by ARPA dollars for that purpose? So I agree with Derek. In principle, it's really just reserves, but I'm also thinking about the pandemic a little bit. Is this project a spend to save project, or will it increase the operating costs of the town in a later budget? The other thing I'm going to be looking at is, are there alternative funding mechanisms? So I'm going to start looking at the mechanics of the budget. Do we have another option of funding it here so that we can preserve resources in a different area? Can the project be delayed without significant harm? And then looking to Mike's point, looking to next year, when we started this process, when we did Latimer, we knew the debt service was going to peak this year. And at the time we passed Latimer, we said, okay, when that happens, the operating budgets have to come in as flat as possible. And instead, they're the highest operating budgets we've ever had. So we weren't able to do that. So what that tells, and again, not through fault, some of these were circumstances beyond our control, but what that tells me is that in looking forward next year, we're going to have to cut capital significantly. And I'm just going to throw it out there. We're probably going to have to cut $5 million out of the capital budget next year. So just to start preparing for that, because if you can't decrease your operating budget, you have to go to capital. We had planned to increase our capital budget and keep operating down. We weren't able to do that. You can't do both at the same time. So I'm thinking about next year, and just wanted to lay that out there as we begin. And the last thing I think about is, well, what are our neighbors doing? And that's always controversial because people say, well, why? We're Simsbury. We don't need to look. But we do, because the research has shown that if you don't, towns devolve. Businesses will choose your neighboring town. It can lead to a downward economic spiral. So all these things are sort of going to be, in my mind, where we are. We're going to go through some motions. Thankfully, Amy's had a chance to walk through them. We're going to change, I think, if we vote the way I hope we do. The one thing I will say about this board, we don't always agree. I don't expect us to agree tonight, but I do respect everyone on this budget, and I do appreciate all the work they've done. People may not realize how much work is spent going over the budgets, but these people here on the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, and of course town staff, spend hours and hours going through this. And actually members of the public read these budgets, and we appreciate everyone who's taken the time to do that. So I'm going to start with calling for some motions that I put forward. Some board members may wish to alter them, may not wish to make a motion, may wish to make alternate motions, but I'm going to start with the easy motions that I think will pass and that we have discussed in the past. And the first one I'm going to start with is, may I have a motion to increase the revenue for Memorial Pool by $20,000?
Oh, yeah, that came up. Yeah. So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Remember that came up in the
Oh, okay,
report
okay.
earlier that we're getting
That's
more
why
money
we did
because
the
of
quarterly
swim
before we
lessons.
did the budget.
gotcha.
Amy, that wasn't in the written motion. I'm gonna go slow and let Amy tell me when
Catch up.
she's ready for the next motion.
You increased it by 20,000?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
May I have a motion to increase the contingency for the vacancy line item from 235,000 to 250,000 for a 15,000 increase from where the Board of Selectmen ended?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just a question, because when you were going through your quarterly report, Amy, you said we had about 250,000 in savings from vacancies just in the public safety area. What was it throughout the entire town workforce?
I don't know, let me look.
This would be an overall, last year, if you'll recall, we did the vacancy rate at 200. This would be taking it to 250.
So about 250, 270, 300, probably about 300,000.
So this is within range.
So 250 seems reasonable.
We did have Amy vet that and go through and she did an analysis. Would you like to speak to that? I did ask Amy what she thought was reasonable, and she did think we could go to 250 reasonably, but that was after a fairly sustained analysis. Would you say that's accurate? Okay. May I have a motion to increase?
Wait, we didn't vote on that.
Yes.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Good job. That would be bad. Okay, may I have a motion? This is a Linda motion. A motion to increase the insurance refund revenue line item from 27,500 to 60,000.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, here comes the really exciting motion. May I have a motion to increase the interest investment income revenue from 100,000 to 800,000?
I'll move it.
Second.
Amy confirming that number before we go to a vote? Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Before we get too excited, we have to remember that it's all wiped out by the motor vehicle, but at least we're not in a deficit because of it. But that is a big help.
Gee, thanks.
Sorry. All
I'm going to
right.
give you a big wet blanket.
This one is probably the least exciting one, but we're going to do it anyway. May I have a motion to increase revenues in World Skate line item from 80,000 to 85,000, $5,000 increase in revenue?
Sure.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, next, as you'll recall, after the Board of Selectmen final budget hearing, there were an error in accounting, and we need to do some cleanup motions there. Amy had sent an email about those, so we'll just do a couple quick cleanup motions there. May I have a motion to increase the Board of Selectmen Community Services Public Agency line item by $100,000 to fund the Housing Authority in the amount of $100,000 for capital improvements?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously.
So this was one of the things that wasn't, just to clarify, that the Board of Selectmen intended to be in their budget and it got left out.
Yes, it was a recording error by Amy when she went and do that. And that is being funded by ARPA dollars again, but to Derek's point, really capital reserves for affordable housing. Then the next motion is a cleanup motion from fiscal year 2023. If members of the public and this board may recall, in 2023, this board, upon the recommendation of the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, recommended that we fund 2 years Board of Education two social workers for 2 years using fiscal year 2023 ARPA dollars. Because it's an operating budget, you appropriate them only for the current year. So those We appropriated them last year for the fiscal year 2023 budget and assigned them in 2023 budget to be used for this year. So it's already an approved expenditure. We just have to do the formal appropriation because it's an operating expense. So with that, may I have a motion to approve $225,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund 2023 ARPA themed dollars assignment to the Board of Education operating budget to fund the second year of salaries and benefits for 2 social workers.
So moved.
I will second.
Any further discussion? All in-
Yeah, I just want to make a clarification to the public that if the Board of Ed wants to continue, with these social workers, it will be in next year's operating budget because that was one of the things we talked about quite extensively is using ARPA dollars for capital, which are one-time items. These are not one-time items. They might be one-time items.
That was the intention.
Yeah.
That's how it was sold,
Yeah. The social workers.
that they were 2 years, yeah.
Well, we
No,
weren't-
no, I understand
yeah.
that, but I'm saying if they intend
they
to
would
keep
be-
the social, if they intend to keep the social workers on, it will be part of the operating budget
Right.
next year.
That's right. It would not be funded out of reserves. That's
Yep.
correct. And there is a plan to feather it in and some using the non-lapsing fund. So there is a plan to do that. Yeah. So that is, yeah. So we do have a plan for that. Was one of the questions we asked during the quarterly, whether they're going to need to use the non-lapsing fund to make their operating deficit this year. It looks like they're not, so those dollars will now be available to feather in the social workers, which was part of the original plan. But that's why it was crucial for us to understand that during the quarterly discussion. All right, the next one, they're going to be, all in favor, please say aye. It's going to be a long night. Okay, the next one, there are 2 motions to consider. I'm going to recommend one, but I did want to make the board, I know we've discussed this, but the public understand that there are 2 motions. This is regarding the operating fire district generator. This goes to one of my criteria. Are there alternative funding mechanisms available for the project? This is a project that came to us to request a generator for the fire district in the amount of $123,125 using capital reserves. At this point, the fire district is an independent taxing organization, and they do have the ability to tax for it and fund that. They also have reserves and a capital fund. So at this point, I would not recommend that using town dollars for this project. But as a taxpayer, and this is me speaking as an individual, of course I'm going to support the fire district budget and this expenditure, but they have an alternative funding mechanism. And when they came to the Board of Selectmen and asked for the tax refunds are granted by the Board of Selectmen, and it was very clear at that point we keep the 2 towns separate, and the fire district did not pay for that tax refund, did not reimburse the fund, nor should they have. You try and keep the taxing district separate. So I am in support of this project. I just think it needs to be done with the fire district dollars. The other alternative is to fund it. But I'm going to ask for the motion to eliminate the fire district generator project in the amount of $123,125.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. The next one is a new line item and is in part possible because of what we just did. And that is every year, the Board of Selectmen has something that breaks. It's the something that breaks motion. Or there is a new request for a grant that requires a match. Or something comes up and that is more expensive than what we had originally planned. As we saw last year, we ran into problems with supplemental appropriations. And so to avoid that, I'm going to recommend that we approve a CNR contingency line item for emergency capital repairs, unanticipated capital cost overages, or matches for unanticipated grants to leverage town dollars. This would be done pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 7-348. Normally, you aren't allowed to do contingency line items except if authorized by the legislature, and so this one is authorized by 7-348. The rationale for that is that this will expenditures from this line item will no longer go against the supplemental appropriation because it will be an approved appropriation. So in some ways, it's a technical thing. It does require prior Board of Selectmen approval before that line item can be spent. And I would recommend over the summer that the Board of Finance consider a policy to permit the Director of Finance to spend without prior Board of Finance approval from this line item up to an authorized amount and then report to the Board of Finance. And that would be a policy similar to what we do with the CNR project policy, where we permit the director to spend $5,000 and then report to us. We'll give her whatever the authorized amount and ask Amy to recommend an amount to help with administrative ease in administering that project. So with that as an explanation, I'd ask for a motion pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 7-348 to appropriate $100,000 in a contingency line item in the Capital Reserve Fund for emergency capital repairs, unanticipated capital cost overages or matches for unanticipated grants to leverage town dollars. The contingency to be funded with an appropriation from the Capital Reserve Fund. In accordance with Connecticut General Statute 7-348, expenditures from this line item require approval by the Board of Finance before expenditures are authorized. May I have that motion?
I will make the motion.
Second?
Any further discussion?
Yeah.
No,
Go ahead. I want to clarify, as I understand this, this is not adding to the budget. This is taking existing CNR money and kind of earmarking it specially for this purpose. And I just would note historically that when the Capital Reserve Fund was created overall, that basically was the same purpose as this.
No, that's exactly right. What it does is it just takes care of the supplemental appropriation. We could spend that money, but it would apply towards the supplemental appropriation if we don't do this motion.
Yeah. I would also just note, we had an extraordinary number of supplemental appropriations this year, and I kind of don't want to encourage that by earmarking a line so that people can avoid going through the process.
They still would have to go through the
Right.
process.
You
through
just
the
won't
Board of
have to have a vote.
Technically, they don't have to go through the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen may choose to require that, and if I were on the Board of Selectmen, I would, but that's up to you. And then if we do the policy, it would then give Amy the administrative ease to take care of the minor stuff where there are overages, and it wouldn't impact. In some ways, this is a highly technical motion. It doesn't really change our reserves. It doesn't change the approval process, but it does help us avoid some of the supplemental appropriation problems we ran into this year. Minor. We can see how it works. I will say Glastonbury does this. Other towns do this. So this is not an extraordinary, I think,
And to
initiative.
clarify, it's for an already approved project, right? It's truly a contingency.
Or for an emergency.
Or for an
Or
emergency.
for an emergency,
Yes.
okay.
So,
So how was it arrived at, the 100,000?
so I chose it because I was trying to come up. Well, we know in the past we've seen the 60,000. There was the berm problem. There was a 15,000 boiler project. So there's always something in that range.
Yeah.
And because of this year of inflationary things, we have, as Amy pointed out, in the Capital Reserve Fund, we have tended to see overages there. So I thought that was a reasonable amount. I looked at what Glastonbury did, and they were between 100 and they're trying to get it up to 175. So that's how I chose that. But you're right.
No, I was just curious.
Yeah.
So we had discussion.
Yeah. Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries unanimously. Now, because we just did that, we now have the ability to do a match with the supplemental appropriation. So I'm going to move to request a motion to eliminate the EV station project. Mr. Roy has confirmed there are currently no grants available at this time. Should a grant arise that requires a match, we now have a contingency fund which we can go to. So in other words, this is a way to fund this in an alternate manner. So we don't need to double fund that.
But they would presumably have to come for approval
Yes.
to go that. I would just point out
Yes.
that there's been a lot in the news recently about EV stations. Walmart and 7-Eleven have both committed to put EV charging stations in all of their parking lots. Mitchell Auto is installing in Simsbury EV charging stations. I never see the government's job as competing with the private sector. If the private sector's doing it, I don't think the government should be doing it. I wouldn't be in favor even if there is a grant. I don't think that's an appropriate role for government. Those grants can go to the private sector and they can build them.
Well, just in case it's not clear, nevertheless, this was a line item in the budget that was based on the assumption that grants would be available in the future to which we could make a contribution to build it. It turns out that none of those grants is on the horizon right now, so there really isn't any reason for this line item. We're not really killing any project by eliminating.
And every home is technically an EV charger. I've plugged my car in that I've owned since 2019 at home, and the free chargers out there, I've parked up here when I could have parked there and grabbed free energy from the town, but I don't want to raise town costs, so I pay for it myself. And I think that we should not be
You should make the
giving that away
motion
for
then, Mike,
free.
right now.
What's that?
You should make the motion
I
right
don't
now.
think, we don't have the authority.
You should be the one, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to make a motion.
We're all expressing our gratitude.
Oh, no, no.
I know I've
Oh,
asked for
oh,
a
no, I
motion.
thought you
I
meant-
haven't. Yeah.
I'm saying
I'll
you
let
should make the
Mike,
motion.
before, I'll let Mike make the motion, then I
And Linda can second it.
Well, to this motion here,
eliminate the EV station.
I move to eliminate the EV station project.
Second.
Okay. So the only thing I would add to this is if it does come to us, because we are doing it for free, I would not be in support of it unless we charge for the electricity, because that's an increase to the operating budget. So going forward, if it does come to us to get my vote, that would need to be in there. We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. Okay, now we get to some of the harder motions, and this is where I do ask members of the public to try and remember that we're doing the best we can, and we're doing the things we think are best for the town, given the limited resources. So these are the hard motions, and we have seen now that the police commission and their consultant report have indicated that the town needs 6 new police department positions. We'll be funding one of them, I assume. It's already funded in the Board of Selectmen budget. I'm not going to recommend removing that. We know that next year the town social worker position will need to find a funding source that has not yet been identified. We have a parks maintainer position and we have a mechanics position. So that's 9 positions that need to be filled. In some ways, I don't feel it's our board to pick what that should be, that those are the priorities of the Board of Selectmen. And for that reason, my recommendation is that we eliminate one of those positions, but we don't decide which one. So we would eliminate both and then create a contingency line item for a new position to be determined by the interim town manager upon the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, considering in totality all the positions that are out there. And I would also add the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association maybe needing a permanent line item in the operating budget and should also be considered. So whether you decide to fund an additional police department position with that, whether you decide to fund additional Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association, whether you decide to fund the parks maintainer or the mechanic, or put money aside for the social worker, we leave that up to the Board of Selectmen to think about all the positions in totality. The reason why we're doing that is the police department consultant recommendation came in after the town manager's budget was proposed, so did not have the benefit of considering the new positions at that time. So with that, and I understand that I don't know if this motion is going to pass or not, but I would ask to have a motion, and I'm going to do 2 at once. Motion to eliminate the mechanics and the park maintainer positions and move to increase, again, using Connecticut General Statute 7-348, a contingency line item in the operating budget by an additional $100,000 for the purpose of funding a new position.
in accordance with Connecticut General Statute 7348. Expenditures from this line item will require approval by the Board of Finance before expenditures are authorized. And move that any unexpended amount from this contingency line item, so in other words, if you choose not to fill the position this year, for this purpose will lapse at fiscal year 2024 year-end close and be returned to the general fund. So again, this is funding one of the two positions requested, but leaving it to the town manager and the Board of Selectmen to make that recommendation. I will say, if it does come back to us for recommendation for filling, I'd want to understand how you are ranking the priorities, knowing there are 9 positions out there that need to be funded. I think Art and Bert made the point very eloquently. There are going to be more needs that we are able to fund next year, and so we're going to need to start to see that ranking. So with that, I've asked for the motion. Is there someone who's willing to make that motion?
I so move.
I will second it.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, if it, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just to make it clear, I mean, I think this motion speaks to the point I was trying to address earlier, which, as you said, which is that we need to think of each appropriation now in the larger context, part of which includes our expectation that next year's budget is going to be another minefield and potentially it will increase our neighbors' taxes by just as much as they're going up this year. And so we know that in addition to the positions that have been proposed for this year, several new positions will be needed next year. We need to start thinking of them all together and prioritizing them. That job is the job of the Board of Selectmen, and I congratulate you, Lisa, for coming up with a mechanism that will allow us to give give the Board of Selectmen that opportunity, and then come back to us and explain what they've done, and I'll support it. But I think this is a very good proposal, and I intend to vote for it.
Just a matter of clarification, is
Sure.
the sunset provision on the funds part of the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't need to be because this is an operating expenditure and all operating expenditures do
Okay. Yeah,
revert. But because the other one was a capital, that gets 3 years. So this,
So to be clear, what you're proposing is that of the 3 new positions that were requested by the Board of Selectmen, you'd fund 2 of them.
yes. The police
The
and.
police and one of these other 2.
And the reason why I chose police, it goes back to my criteria of fixed costs or public safety.
I think it's all very logical. I would just, $100,000, and this is a justification for increasing budget, so don't take this the wrong way, but we're, $100,000 on a $121 million budget. We need to think about these things, but it's the magnitude. It's 0.00008% of our budget, so.
But I would just say to Bert's point.
I know.
Yes, but we need to prioritize them within the concept of 9 positions, which is suddenly closer to almost $1 million.
Yep.
And they're ongoing positions. It's another 0.0008% in perpetuity.
No, understood. That's just.
All right.
Bert made several of the points I was going to make. The only one I'd underscore is that I think we have to get started in this process. This is what we're going to have to be doing over the next few years, and I think this is a good way of recognizing that this is the kind of decision we're going to have to make, and so I support starting now.
Concur.
Anyone else? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously.
No, it was not unanimous.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear a no.
No, you didn't ask for nays.
Are there any nays? Yes. Okay. We have a nay. So that is, let the record reflect that Mr. Doyle, Mr. Health, and Mr. House, and Mr. Peterson and Ms. Hebner voted for. Ms. Schofield voted against. Okay. The next one, we had a request from Mr. Roy to increase the engineering consultant, which the Board of Selectmen did grant in the operating budget, but he was looking for 50,000. One option we have, when I think about the funding mechanism, is to use capital reserve to fund the additional 30,000 for that. That would, although it is an opportunity cost for future expenditures out of capital reserves, it does not impact the mill rate. So I'm requesting a motion to add a capital non-recurring project for capital funding to be funded by capital reserve fund in the amount of $30,000. I will note for the public that is a new line item and it is an increase, but it is being funded by capital reserves and not by the next year's property taxes, although with property tax dollars from the past. Is there anyone who's willing to make that motion? Seeing none, that motion does not pass. The next one, before we go into the motions.
Can we have a little bit of discussion? Just, I think one of the things that we've talked about wanting to do is start the capital planning process earlier. And I don't know if that was part of what you were thinking there, but I don't know that it needs to be funded or, okay, so.
No, yeah, that was more for engineering consultant for capital projects. Okay. So the next one is to Derek's point. I think Derek eloquently made the point that, and I support him in that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But there was something in the Board of Selectmen budget, which was $20,000 for an, and I,
Yes.
that's not this.
That's not that.
Okay.
It was in addition to that.
All right.
That Mr. Roy felt he needed additional dollars, so that does not pass. The next one is to look at, as we had talked earlier, how do we get the budget down if we can't do the operating budget? Well, you have to look to capital. And one of the way to get capital down is to, instead of borrowing at a high cost, is to pay cash. And the way that gets the operating budget down is it reduces debt service. And it reduces debt service over not just the current year, but for the next 10 years. So it's a permanent reduction in debt service. I think the first selectman presented that as an option. The Board of Selectmen did adopt that using cash to offset the bond issuance that is coming up in May. That would be about $1.2 million that they had recommended, and then to use $2 million in cash to offset a future issuance for the Flower Bridge in 2024, but that would not hit the operating budget until 2 years later, so you wouldn't capture those savings immediately. My recommendation in consultation with the Director of Finance is to flip that, and instead of doing the Flower Bridge in cash this year, to take the $2 million in cash to offset the fiscal year 2023, because that will get us, instead of 170,000, more like 300, or Amy's going to give us what that number is in savings. So that will be immediate relief to the operating budget, and then to bond the Flower Bridge in 2022. So it's just flipping the funding.
2022.
I mean 2024. So what that does is it continues to fund the Flower Bridge, but using bonded money, but uses cash to offset the issuance that we anticipate coming up in May or June. By doing that immediately, to Derek's point, you capture that savings in the fiscal year 2024 budget, and is an immediate mill rate reduction. The question is how much to do that. The Board of Selectmen did recommend over $3 million in cash to offset stuff. The Director of Finance had concerns about the use of that much cash up front, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that. And also, if we don't use the full amount now, it doesn't preclude us from doing the exact same thing next year. But would you like to speak as to how you came up with the recommendation of $2 million as opposed to 3.2?
So I don't really know if I have a recommendation as far as, you know, 2 million versus 3 million. I mean, I'd like 1 million, $500,000, or no, none, 'cause I like my cash. So once we spend that money and we use that money to offset our bonding, like, that money's gone. So that's money for, you know, emergencies later on. It's money that we could probably, you know, replenish with year-end savings. It just allows more flexibility when we have the cash in-house. So to spend 3 million upfront, and once it's gone, not having that extra, say, million or $1.5 million or whatever it may be, for flexibility, knowing, or in this case, not knowing what's coming down the line. It's just a comfort level for me that the less cash that we give away up front, the more comfort I have.
Amy, can you speak to next year's CNR request, which is explosive? It's quite a bit more than this year.
Maybe a little bit. So the CNR request, I think it's, actually, let me pull it up so I can speak intelligently.
So as I recall, there's quite a bit of unfunded CNR requests for next year. So in thinking about this year, and based on what Amy said, I am going to recommend and ask for a motion, but this is where we may not all agree, for $2 million to do that. And Amy, what would the change in debt service be if we did that?
Yeah, so next year it looks like there's a spike of about, it goes up to about 5.1 million in requests, and then back down to about 3 million.
Right, so next year is going to be a high need area. Obviously, again, laying the gauntlet, we're not going to fund all the CNR requests next year, so they'll need to come prioritized to us. But
So on top of what the Board of Selectmen did with theirs, so if we reduced what they proposed at the 2 million, it would be additional savings of 206,000. At 2.5 million, it'd be an additional savings of 273,000, and then that 3 million would be an additional savings of 340,000 for the fiscal year 24 budget.
so Amy, are you keeping in the
Part of
one,
their-
the 1 million they've already spent?
Right. So this is the new, it's truing up what they did to what you're doing. So it's their savings on top of yours.
So if we took the 1.2 million that they've already spent, because they went from 833 to 8147, right? And then add another million to that,
Right.
then we are at what for
So
debt
then-
service?
Yep, so then the 2 million gives us a debt service payment of about 7.9 million. So on top of that, it's a savings of 206,000.
So we've gone from 833 to 7.9. And then that, for members of the public, that's about 400,000, is that right? 300. 300,000, that then carries over not just this year, but next year and next year and next year for the next 10 years. And then we would have that 1 million again next year. So we would have bonded for it. There's nothing that prohibits us from paying off some of the bonding that we could pay that off and then immediately reduce debt service again next year. So it doesn't prohibit us from do that, but it's a total 300. So with that, I'll request a motion to appropriate a total of 2 million from the capital reserve from ARPA themed dollars, or no, it'd be 2.2 million because they did 1.2 million.
No, just the 2 million.
The 2 million from capital reserve fund to reduce the fiscal year 2023 borrowing to fund borrowing costs taken from capital reserve fund, and to reduce debt service from 8147,216 to, Amy, can you fill in that number?
$7,940,310.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to make that motion?
So the number on this page is $8 million, and we're throwing $2 million.
We're adding 1 million. Because they've already incorporated the 1 million, so it'd be a total.
Okay.
Of 3.
All right.
It'll be a total of 3?
No, a total of 2 million, correct, Amy?
Right.
You're paying down the
what's
debt, but
confusing.
you still have the interest.
Yeah, it
Yes.
took me a minute to get there, sorry.
Yeah, so we would be using a total of $2 million to offset debt. The town manager's recommended debt service was 8,377 or something like that. This would take that down to 7,900.
So are we doing discussion before the motions are made?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was out of order.
That's all right.
Right,
I mean, I'm happy to discuss now, too.
Well, why don't we
Doesn't
do
matter.
the motion
I
and
will
second? Is there
I
a
move
second?
I'll second so we can discuss it.
Yes.
Okay, now discussion.
Yeah.
And we can do amendments.
So Amy, can you remind us how much, if you took 2 million of the capital reserve fund, how much would be left in the capital reserve fund, given other things that have already been discussed? And what's happened this year and,
With, Linda, with the anticipated 800 year-end contribution.
right, right.
So, this was with the ARPA themed dollars. So we would still have almost 2 million in the capital reserve fund if we use the ARPA themed dollars.
Does that include the 800,000 year-end contribution at close?
No,
So it'd be 2,800.
that's what we have now, yep.
2.8 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I make a friendly amendment?
You may.
I would recommend that we actually use 3 million of it. Oh, sorry, wait, we have 2.8 million at year end, is that what you said? Oh, and that's after. So if we took
Right,
3 million
so-
out, we'd have an ample amount of 1.8 still left in there. And as you've heard me say in the past, we didn't even have a capital reserve fund until fairly recently. And I know Amy likes to have lots of cushions around her. But we have $16 million in a general fund reserve fund. That's what that's for.
Right.
And so having multiple reserve funds is duplicative, and it's tying up taxpayer dollars, in my opinion, and making the budget harder to meet. I think, we shouldn't have that much in this capital reserve fund, because it's really for capital and paying cash for capital and the like, and for emergencies. But we've got 16 million in general fund for emergencies and for backup, so.
Amy, what would that bring debt service to if we use the 3 million?
The debt service.
7, 8.
Saves you 300,000 or 400,000.
7,873,560. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the 2.5 million. If it was the 3 million, it's 7,806,810.
So going from the 8.3 from the town managers to this number is about 400,000? And then how much, assuming 800,000 contribution at year end to capital reserves, how much would be in capital reserves if we did that?
2.8.
1.8.
1.8.
Well, it'd still be the same, because we're not taking it from capital reserves, we're taking it from like the ARPA themed dollars, right? Is that what you had in your motion?
Yep.
Yep.
But ARPA themed dollars are capital reserve.
You're just combining the two.
Yeah. So how much would be left for capital reserve at that point? 2.8?
1.8.
Something.
1.8, hold on.
It's got to be 1.8.
Yeah, yeah.
This part's arithmetic, right?
Simple. Math that
So
you don't
you're
need a calculator
using-
for.
1 second. So we said 7.
The 2 and the 3.
Well, while we're waiting, I agree with Linda. We don't need all these extra buckets. And if there's money there that's gonna help and it's gonna lower and increase, lower things by $140,000 for the next 10 years on top of what's already proposed here, I'm all on board.
I'd just add that recommendation by Linda is to use the exact same amount of dollars that the Board of Selectmen recommended. So it would not be an increase above what the Board of Selectmen, it would just change the year that we appropriated.
While I appreciate the discussion, I'll go back to my comments earlier. If you were, fortunate enough to, get a mortgage in early 2021 at 2.5 to 3%, and now you have discretionary dollars to either earn at 4 or 5% as opposed to paying down your mortgage or paying additional principal down on your mortgage. I don't think it's fiscally sound, if that makes sense. So I would rather, if we find capital projects important enough to use that cash to pay for capital items as opposed to paying down our cheaper debt and then bonding with more expensive cost of capital today. To me, it just doesn't make sense. So I think it'll put maybe the onus back on us as to, what the real important capital items are instead of continuing to borrow them, particularly at higher costs. So I will not be voting in favor of this
So
motion.
Derek, just to clarify, this is money that hasn't been bonded, so this will be bonded at the higher cost. So we will be
Yeah,
foregoing
that's-
the bonding at that higher
Sorry,
cost.
because in the course of the discussion, I lost track of this as to whether we are applying this money to eliminate existing debt, or rather to spend it on projects that have been approved but not yet bonded.
Projects that have been approved but not yet
But
bonded.
not yet bonded.
It's what you
Yeah,
want.
so it's not paying off at the cheaper level,
Okay.
it's the higher level.
Okay.
To forego that, to your exact point.
So you might want to
But-
amend your.
Well, no, but we're following with a bonding motion to appropriate, to bond. And I'm just saying, why would we go through that exercise? If we
Well,
did
but the reason why to do that, and it's a fair question, is it would enable us to save 400,000 in this year's operating budget. I mean, we could save that, we could wait and do it 2 years later and save 400,000 2 years from now. Or we could capture that savings now when we know, we've heard from the public that people are concerned about the mill rate. And this
Yeah.
would be an immediate help to the budget right now. And it would carry over to next year when we again know it's gonna be a difficult year.
So you could attribute it 100% to like Latimer Lane, for example, because that's more, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
a big
whatever
chunk of
that-
it.
Okay.
I mean, Amy will, I assume, apply it not to Latimer because that's the longer thing and it will be
Right.
bonded
There's
at a
more-
lower.
There's higher savings applying
Yeah.
it to the non-Latimer.
So she'll
project.
apply it to the
Okay.
highest bonding cost to get the full bang for the buck.
Yeah, okay.
And
And I'll reserve my
Go ahead.
comment to my vote, I guess.
To clarify the parliamentary procedure, I think the question before us is, would the maker of the motion accept a friendly amendment to increase from 2 million to 3 million? Okay, and I will accept that as a friendly amendment. My seconder over here, I don't know how you look at it.
I'll second. Right, and to the point, in past meetings, we've discussed our debt service, and notionally, we're entering a kind of 3-year peak, after which our debt service was projected to decline because older borrowings will be eliminated. I'm not sure how realistic that is. We're expecting new capital projects, and so using what resources we have now to reduce the amount of our debt to the greatest extent possible, I think is a prudent measure as well. So I accept, or I second the amendment, and
Friendly amendment.
Do we need to, parliamentarian, do we need to vote on the friendly amendment?
Yes.
or
No,
can-
no,
Okay.
you have it accepted. My motion has accepted the friendly amendment, so has the seconder, so we're proceeding now as though we're three, is it? It is $3 million.
Okay.
We're still in discussion, right?
Yes.
yes.
What would the 3 million offset due to our capital reserve balance?
So if we did the 3 million and we bonded for the Flower Bridge without the year-end contribution anticipated for fiscal year 23, we'd have a balance of about 1.4 million in the capital reserve.
Oh, so-
With the contribution, it would be 2.2.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Got plenty in there.
The math was harder than I thought.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And again, I'll just reiterate, was the recommended amount to use from the Board of Selectmen. So it's not increasing or decreasing what they recommended, but using it earlier to capture some of the savings to get mill rate relief in the current year and next year. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. The only point I'll add to that is to Bert's point again, next year, we're really gonna have to look at capital, and my number is 5 million needs to go away next year. So we'll start to prioritize that. But with that, we have a motion, we have a second to appropriate 3 million from the capital reserve from ARPA themed dollars to reduce the fiscal year 2023 borrowing. Amy, have I said that sufficiently for our bond council to be happy with what I just said?
There we go.
May I have a motion?
I'll keep on council in mind this time. Go ahead.
May I have
A vote to
a-
approve. We've already made the motion.
may we vote to approve the appropriation of $3 million from the Capital Reserve Fund ARPA-themed dollars to reduce the May 2023 bond issuance amount. Okay. All in favor, please say.
So,
Well,
I'm sorry, the May 20,
Amy is going to go out to bond in May. Instead of
May 20.
bonding for the full amount, we're going to reduce what we bond for and use
Right,
appropriated
okay.
dollars from Capital Reserve Fund.
the
So we're
part that-
using cash. Yeah, it's
Sorry, I
complicated. The bond council gave us this, trying to make her happy and our director happy. Amy is happy, so I'm happy. All in favor, please say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay. May I have a motion to
Madam
appropriate?
Chair, I'm very sorry. I have hit the 2-hour mark in this chair, and my bladder is telling me that it's time for a break.
All right, we will go ahead
Motion
and
to
recess
rescue
for 5
Mr.
minutes.
Doyle's bladder.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm right. Moving on, so the second part of the motion that we left would be to then bond the Flower Bridge. So again, just a flip-flop of how we're funding things to get the savings immediately in this year and next year, as opposed to 2 years later. So with that, may I have a motion to appropriate $1,989,000 for the O'Drake Hill Flower Bridge to be funded with bonds?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, we had lots of discussion about this. I had asked whether there was a life safety issue. I drove by the bridge. I know it needs work. It definitely does, but I don't think there was much of a value proposition presented by the Flower Bridge people. I'd like to see what they did to raise money to help offset some of the costs. I'd like to see what their finances are. I don't think you can come to us with, an estimate of, what needs to be fixed and the amount of $2 million without having a further discussion about, kind of what are the finances of the Flower Bridge Committee and trying to figure out a way to smooth this expense item. So while I understand the need, I don't necessarily agree with how it's presented. So that's just.
Comment. This is actually one that I would vote for because of my 2 criteria, which is not the public safety thing, but because if you don't do it now, then you have to do the engineering study all over again. So it becomes more expensive to do it later, and it will become a public safety thing in the not too distant future I talked with Tom Roy about it. And secondly, I hear your point about, can they contribute to it, but they're not in the capability of raising a couple $1 million for a project like this. We own the bridge.
I'm
the
not
town.
suggesting
Yeah.
that they would come up with $2 million by any means, but we didn't. There's no plan. Once we spend this $2 million, are we just going to wait another 20 years and all of a sudden we have another $2 million budget item? There's just it just lacked a lot of I don't know, preparation, I guess, in terms of the ask.
Mrs. Boyko asked me a question, which I thought was a good one, and maybe you have a sense, Wendy. Are there other funding sources? Has the town looked for grants from the Historic Commission and the like?
Not the Historic Commission, but when the IIJA came out.
What's that?
The Infrastructure and Something Jobs Act, right? I can't remember the other word. We did talk about, it does do bridges. So, I don't know if the town looked into it. I did a little bit of research, but it didn't sound like it covered this type of bridge, that it was much more
It's not a
transportational
transportation bridge.
bridges,
Yeah.
and it didn't fit that classification. But it is possible to, next year, over this year, if we're gonna still bond for it, right? Before we go to bond, maybe we could find some grants.
Did they talk to, folks, for example, or the town of Canton who did their Collinsville Bridge, their, Trestle Bridge? Did they consult with them to figure out the costs or how they funded that? My guess is probably no. So there wasn't really any research done here. It was, this is what it's going to cost. And naturally, you know, the longer it goes, the more expensive it's gonna get. Like, I understand that.
And that's only going to get worse over time, because steel doesn't get any younger as it ages, just like you and me.
Yeah, but that's not to say
It's going
that
to
you
get more
couldn't
brittle, and sooner or later, that thing's,
That's not to say you couldn't allocate $250,000 this year for the next however many years and have a staged approach to spending the capital as opposed to funding, you know, not that we're going to fund it all at once, but I mean that, you know, again, there wasn't really much of a plan. It was retroactive to kind of the condition of the bridge.
I think it's been coming up for a few years.
Since 2015,
Yeah.
I put it on there.
Yeah.
I would just add, I think it is a priority. We got to look at all these things as, is it a priority? And it's one of the real iconic things about the town that I would not want to go another couple of years for lack of funds and not getting an adequate attack under there. They're having, we saw photos of the rust taking place underneath. So for me, I think it is a priority, and I'd like to act on it now.
On the iconic part of the discussion, Art, I would say that, you know, the barns or sheds, however you want to classify them, are considered iconic to some people as well. So it's a priority. It's a matter of prioritization, for me anyway. It's not to criticize your thought process.
Yeah, we'll take it.
So Amy, when we authorized the bonding for this would not actually go out for bond probably for 2 years, right? So there would be an opportunity to explore
look
further
for
grants.
funding.
I did speak with our state representative, Melissa Osborne, and asked her to look for state bonding as well. So she is on top of that. But, you know, to your point, it does give the opportunity to look at it. I know that they did do the engineering study, so there was some look at grants, and Tom Roy, who is not here, but is fairly aggressive in looking for grants. I imagine that there was. We don't have the benefit of him being here to ask, but authorization to bond doesn't mean you have to. That's solely within the purview of the town manager and the Board of Selectmen as to when to do that, and it will give the opportunity to look for other grant offsets, which I strongly encourage you do, because to
Yeah.
Derek's point, to the extent we can not bond that will free up money either to reduce debt service or to fund other projects. So for me, in terms of criteria, this is one of those that's deferred maintenance. If we don't do it now, the cost will increase because we'll have to do another engineering study, and the rust will continue, so it will deteriorate more. So, and this is a current town asset, so it's preservation of a current town asset. So are there any other comments before I call for the vote?
Yeah, I would just recommend that the Bridge Committee be a little more proactive in the approach and not necessarily hire anybody, but just be more aware of certain stresses on certain parts of the bridge. You know, something that might be visible that maybe there could be some preventative maintenance as opposed to these large big ticket items. I imagine that this motion will pass. So just that would be the only thing I'd ask.
Thank you. Okay, with that, all in favor of appropriating $1,989,000 for Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge to be funded with bonds? Please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
aye.
Nay.
One nay, so we
One
have.
nay, I'm 2 nays.
Okay.
Sorry.
So for the record, we will have Mr. Doyle and Mr. Peterson voted nay. Those voting aye are Mr. Helfand, Mr. House, Ms. Hebner, and Ms. Schofield. The motion passes by majority vote. The next one, I'm sure people were riveted at the end of last year's budget cycle when we assigned dollars at the, for an assessor audit to be done.
My favorite topic.
It is. And I do want to commend Amy, who supervised the town assessor, and our assessor, Francine Beeland, for the work they did this year in capturing some lost revenue.
Absolutely.
A lot, we're seeing an increase in revenue of 2.3 million. That's a lot of, because of what Ms. Beeland did in capturing past assessments. So without that, this is a huge increase, but without this, it would be quite a bit higher. So thank you for that. And this is a way to go through and really look at best practices as to how we capture revenue. Are we using the right processes and procedures? To Joan's point, are we using the right assessment processes and to get a fair result? And how will this help us with long-term planning? So I know our board is very familiar with that. That was just for the public. At that point, at the end of May, we did assign dollars. An assignment is in the capital reserve fund. An assignment is not an appropriation. It shows an intent to spend dollars. It signals to both the auditors and our rating agencies that we've been planning for that. So this would now be the formal appropriation of those dollars. And with that, may I have a motion to add a capital non-recurring project for the assessor audit and for the initial implementation to be funded with the capital reserve fund assigned dollars in the amount of $150,000.
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion?
It's a fair estimate of what it will cost for or is this an old number?
So it was an old number, but we did think that there will be some
Implementation costs as well.
And equipment. There may be system changes. We know for a fact that they're
IT,
yeah, that they don't even have iPads. They're doing hands and coming back and typing. So there are going to be some equipment needs, and then anything that is not used, it would then revert back to the capital reserve fund.
So there's a little contingency in there, though?
Well, we don't know exactly.
There's not
Yeah.
much point to having a best practices study
Yeah.
if you can't implement it.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
no,
so-
no, I
So
understand.
that's
I
why
was
we
just-
built in money for implementation.
Just want to make sure that there's enough there, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that the recommendation is that we spend more. This goes back to my criteria. This is a spend to save initiative. We already saw that when we hired the additional office worker in the assessor's office, that they were able to capture some revenue. So this is, again, consistent with the spend to save initiative, and this will benefit all departments. Okay, any other comment? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. This next one is, I'm glad Lisa's still here. This is a Lisa motion. It's a minor one, but this goes to best practices of budgeting recurring line items in the operating budget when you can. We can't always do that, but this is a small enough number that we are able to do that this year. And so I would ask for a motion to add a recurring appropriation line item in the library budget for computer replacement costs in the amount of $7,000. This has been a request every year in the capital non-recurring budget, and it is clearly a recurring item.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Okay, the next one is just a policy endorsement. The charter, our charter says that all capital non-recurring projects are individual project appropriations, and that's how we've always done that. And we do have a policy, however, that permits the Director of Finance to authorize some overages by policy, but because it's different than the charter, we're doing a best practice of just approving it for the budget, because technically the next board might not want to adopt that policy. But this is a policy we've already approved. So I'm going to ask for a motion to designate all capital and capital non-recurring projects as individual project appropriations, capped in the amount listed for each project. And further, in accordance with town policy, move that for capital and non-recurring projects only, and this is directly from our policy, anticipated budget transfers between projects can be overspent by $5,000 or 20% of the total project budget, whichever is less, so long as the anticipated overages do not exceed anticipated savings in other projects. The transfer and closeout requests will go to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance at year-end close for those overages. Further, move the Director of Finance to provide monthly reports of any approvals granted under this policy. So this is our current policy. It was for administrative ease. It is only for the CNR project. Capital CIP projects cannot exceed the amount approved. So all in favor, please say
No,
aye.
you have to have a motion
You have to
first.
have a motion.
May I have that motion?
I will move.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Next, we have, and I had a request from a member that we do these individually. Some of these are in the operating budget, except for one of them. And so the motion would be to remove them. To remove an item from the operating budget would require 4 votes, since they are already in there. We have, one has already been approved, so this one I would think is uncontroversial. In 2023, we approved for 2 years, again, the social worker. Because it is an operating request, it's appropriated each year, but it was already approved. So this is just that. So if anyone wants to remove that, you can make that motion, but it's already approved. So we would just be appropriating it again in the current year budget. And the Board of Selectmen has already done that, so it doesn't need to be done by our board. Okay, then we have, in the operating budget, was recommended by the Board of Selectmen 1 year of the library literacy program in the amount of $4,642 using ARPA dollars. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to remove that? Again, that requires 4 votes.
And I would move that,
Is there-
and also have some questions.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to second the removal of that item?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay, discussion, Linda?
So I'm confused about a couple of entries. One was the $8,600 for summer literacy, and then as opposed to this is $4,600, which I understood was the book bike.
Right, so the 4,600 is year 1 of the 3-year plan.
And the $8,600 is what?
The other 2 years.
It would be a 3-year, but because it's an operating budget, we would appropriate only 1 year, and then we would assign the rest of the dollars for next year and the year after.
But if it costs $4,000 to hire somebody to bicycle around town this summer, why would it cost less in the next 2 summers?
No, it would be 4,000 each year. So we're
You said
on-
3 years.
Yes, so it's 12,000 total, 4,000 this year,
The
4,000,
8,000 is
yeah.
for the following
Next
2
Yeah.
years. Okay.
Except
Well,
it's $4,600 and $8,600.
Yeah.
Because it's, the first year has slightly more startup costs.
Okay. I just feel that this is something that is a really nice to have program. It's a tiny little amount of money, but there's an optic for me. And there's money in the library fund that they could use to potentially fund this program, so I will vote against it.
Any other comments?
Wait, she will vote for eliminating.
I will vote for eliminating.
Yes, for eliminating it. It's
Thank
already
you.
in the budget. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to add to discussion? We have a motion to eliminate 1 year of the library literacy program in the amount of $4,642. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Okay, that motion does not carry. It remains in the operating budget, funded by ARPA dollars. The Volunteer Ambulance Association costs associated with running the second ambulance. This is in the operating budget and does not require a vote by us. It will require a vote to remove it. We already eliminated the fire generators, so we don't need to do that. So this will require a motion to remove it. Using my criteria, this goes directly to public safety, and there's not an alternative funding source. So I would not recommend removing this at this point. But does anyone want to make a motion to remove it? Okay, moving on. Oh, we don't have to do that. Okay, the next one is $70,000 in loan forgiveness to the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association and the amount owed to the town of Simsbury for new radio equipment that we kind of required them to buy. Amy has reported that there are savings in the project in general of about $30,000, so the deficit to the town is only $40,000. At this point, again, it goes to my criteria. It's a public safety item. Necessary, it's an obligation the town created, and there is not an alternative funding source, so I would not recommend removing this. Is there anyone who wants to make a motion to remove that? Okay, and we have already approved that $100,000 to the Housing Authority, so that does not need to be done. I would ask for a motion, given that the one-year library literacy program in the amount of $4,642 passed. I would ask for a motion to assign. Again, an assignment is not an appropriation, but it's a intent to spend, a designation, $8,600 in the capital reserve fund to fund the library literacy program in fiscal year 25 and 26.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, those dollars are assigned in the capital reserve for the 2 years following. The next we have before us is, and again, people may not realize, I think I was the first person to introduce pollinator pathways during the solar program. I went before Pure and said, you need to require this in the solar installation. They thought I was crazy. They said no. But we tried to get that passed way back when that. But at this point, we do have, last year we approved funding for a pollinator pathway, and not only did we approve it, we tripled the request. So we did 3 times as much as requested, and there is, in the current year, $16,000 available as a donation to also fund pollinator pathways. We heard from Mr. Taberski that that amount had not even been spent, the triple amount, so there is sufficient funds, and there's not, the $30,000 is not sufficient to do the whole project. Next year, we saw there's going to be a tremendous competition for capital needs, and I think that project should be prioritized with the projects next year, and there is sufficient dollars in there to do the planning necessary to make that evaluation proper. Also, I think there are alternative funding mechanisms. We've seen that the Rotary Club has contributed to pollinator pathway projects. There may be additional funding mechanisms, and ask those funding mechanisms be explored. It's not because I'm not in favor of pollinator pathways. I am very much so. So with that, may I have a motion to remove $30,000 for pollinator funding in fiscal year 2024 in the capital non-recurring
So
budget?
moved.
Second it?
I'm sorry, who was the second? Mike. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. So this one, I am in the Citizens Academy. Like I said, these are very, very hard, but at this point, we are adding a police officer. My recommendation at this point is to reduce police overtime by $20,000 to the amount recommended by the town manager. We have seen in the past that we've had difficulty filling the positions there, so we do anticipate some vacancy rate there. So I would move to reduce police overtime by $20,000 back to the town manager recommended amount.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Lisa. I mean, we're benefiting from those vacancies, which in turn promotes more overtime. So,
They're related, yes.
yeah.
Okay.
And what did we get in vacancy savings from,
Well,
from police specifically? Do we know?
Public safety
160,
total, wasn't it?
about 170.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So all in favor, please say aye. Aye. That motion carries unanimously. And 1 nay? Okay. So let the record reflect the following members voted in favor of the reduction of police overtime. That would be Mr. Doyle, Mr. Helfand, Mr. House, Ms. Hebner, Ms. Schofield. Mr. Peterson voted nay. Okay. The next one is to, we have seen the fund balance at the Simsbury Farms complex is close to $1 million. We will be using some of that for capital, and appropriately so. We did confirm with the Director of Finance that the fund is budgeting more revenues than expenditures. So with that, I would move to reduce the general fund transfer to the Simsbury Farms complex from $183,658 to $151,715, a reduction of $30,000.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
You have that one, Amy? Okay. One came up last night, and so I don't know if we need to do this motion. I'm flipping them. But I saw that the, and we've got Nick here, so maybe you can have, help us out here. We see that the town is applying for a grant funded by congressional directed spending in the amount of $117,000 for the Simsbury Police Department for upgrades. I'm not sure exactly what, but it would be spent in 2024, correct, if you received the grant?
Yes, it's 112,000.
112.
And it is for, I believe, the government's fiscal year 24, federal government's, so it's a little bit off.
Yeah, theirs is
Ours.
October.
When we actually get those funds to spend, I don't know. But it's in a roughly 12,000 for emergency medical dispatch technology upgrade, going from a card system, which is basically a hand system when somebody calls in for a medical emergency. They use a flip chart, so this will be moving to a digital version on our network, using the card system as a backup. We're probably one of the last ones that are using the card system. So it'll be much more efficient, much quicker, and less room for error. And then the 100,000 is for not just the police department, but for the entire town hall, upgrading the access system for interior and exterior doors. I can tell you that at least downstairs anyways, they are from the 2005 renovation, and we are losing parts on those, and there's some security issues that we're overcoming, but it's not so bad, not so great.
So at this point, for the current year, there's no match required, so you obviously would not spend it if you don't get the grant. So my recommendation is that we go ahead and improve it so that once you get the grant, you can just spend it. But
Don't have to do a supplemental.
And don't have to do a supplemental. It saves us from a supplemental.
The caveat is there is a ongoing operating cost for the EMD for the 12,000 that would be initially spent. Each year after that, it's projected to be up $3,000 for licensing. No additional annual costs for the system access.
So it'd be 3,000, not the first year, but in the out years.
Right.
But this is something you feel you need in the long term.
Yes.
So we're gonna have to spend it anyway.
Yes.
So it's a
Well,
way
yeah,
to
'cause
leverage
these
federal
policies-
dollars the first year.
The policies, the support that person on the phone is using the software for, as medical advice advances, is going to change, and the only way to keep those updates is to keep investing in the software and get the updates. So that's what that $3,000 will get us. So that makes sense.
But
So,
also, this is likely technology you would be asking for us to buy in the out years anyway.
Yeah, so probably a decade ago, it was around 50 or 60,000 for this software, and we were worried about what I would call sort of like the buffering issue of, the computer's not working as quickly as you would want them to, and what would happen if that did happen, would we still be able to? And so we've kind of gotten through that. The price has gone down significantly. There are now several vendors for it, so it's a good time for us to do it. And yes, we would be asking for this in the future if this did not come through in this grant opportunity.
so Nick, the motion would be for Simsbury Police Department and Town Hall, what would improvements to
System access.
system access. So may I have a motion for upgrades to the Simsbury Police and Town Hall for system access to be funded by an anticipated congressionally directed spending grant in the amount of $112,000?
I'll move it. Second.
Any further discussion?
Does the upgrade to the town hall, does that include building access? That's what it is.
Yeah, that's what it
So
is.
that's
All
something
interior and
else that we've
exterior.
been anticipating for some time, is improving access to this
Yeah,
building.
there have been moves to try to get this done, and it's just been on the,
Yeah.
it gets pushed back.
Great.
So we'll do that, and that will help us against the supplemental appropriation. We won't have to do that later. Derek?
Don't want to extend further, but do we get cards or do we get, no, how do we get
Really,
in?
what do we get out of
How do we
it?
get in?
So we haven't chosen the actual system yet. But in all likelihood, it would move to a card system and potentially like an ID card system as opposed to just
Okay.
like a blank looking card.
Gotcha.
What about, I guess, I was thinking of access in terms of accessibility. This isn't going to address the accessibility issue.
No, strictly whether somebody's authorized in or
So
out.
it's just making Derek
Protecting
happy.
assets. Yeah.
And the Board of Finance will get a card. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Then, we have had discussions with the Director of Finance, with our thanks. And actually, I forgot to thank you for the quarterly report. I thought that was excellent. We've been working on format, and she's really upped our game there, so much appreciated on that. But we've also been working with the Director of Finance to develop a capital workshop for July and really sort of get comprehensive discussions there on how to evaluate the capital budget process for both capacity and prioritization, and how do we communicate that publicly, and how do we plan for long-term. And so that would be a motion to request the Director of Finance to, and she's already agreed to do this, but it's a formal motion to correct the Director of Finance to coordinate and develop a capital workshop for July 2023 on behalf of the Board of Finance, and to invite the Boards of Education and Selectmen and any other invitees the Director deems relevant for the purpose of developing a funding and capacity plan for projects in the out years, and for developing public criteria and to rank capital needs. May I have a motion?
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Amy, are there any other grants the town has applied for or will apply for, which the town reasonably anticipates receiving in fiscal year 2024 that we should budget for to avoid a supplemental appropriation? Is there anyone else in this room who's aware of any grants out there that we should be aware of, and just take care of the motion right now? Okay, are there any other motions at the pleasure of the Board of Finance?
I have a few topics I'd bring up.
Okay.
And I'll just bring them up as topics first and potentially motions later. So Amy, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I just want to confirm that, there was a little confusion when the Board of Selectmen budget was passed and certain things were left out, and different lists had different things. So I just want to confirm a few things that you already have built in savings that Board of Selectmen wanted for energy. I think that was 20,000. The chief had talked about holiday pay. That's already built in, right? The tourism map was taken out. Median strip. The cart path prep and paving, that was changed to be in Tom's stuff. And the 13th T, that was taken out?
That was changed too.
Okay. So there, one other, and I may make this as a motion, there's $20,000 in the Board of Selectmen budget for an employee satisfaction survey. And it occurs to me that we're going through a period of change here with the town manager having left, the chief temporarily sitting in, then an interim person sitting in until we hire a new town manager, and that maybe this is, given that we're in tight budget times, not the best timing for doing an employee satisfaction survey, that maybe we want to wait till there's a town manager on board, because whatever they might have felt about prior management, that management's gone and is going to be changing a couple times. So I would suggest I move that we
A Google form could do that for free.
Yeah, and you could do it in-house.
I built an app for the Simsbury Soccer Club to be able to evaluate players this weekend.
Yeah.
Right, that they can use on their phone to evaluate
Survey
1,000 kids
Yeah.
for free. So I'm happy to donate my time on an employee satisfaction survey to save us $20,000 and still move forward with the survey. And they can do it every year for free.
So how do I make that as a motion? What's the proper word?
You can, because it's in there, it would be a motion to remove.
Remove the $20,000 for the employee survey.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries.
I have another topic. Somewhat similarly, there's $45,000 in the Board of Selectmen budget for Charter Review Commission. And again, I was thinking about it in terms of if you're potentially going to be hired as the person coming in as the town manager, knowing that, gosh, in a few months there's going to be a charter change that could potentially even eliminate that position or substantially change reporting relationships between different departments, would that make you a little nervous? And wouldn't we rather have that revisited after we have a permanent town manager who can have input into the process, and it's $45,000 that we could save this year. So I would move that we remove the $45,000 for the charter revision and delay that process
Second.
until the following year.
Discussion?
Makes sense.
I have one point of discussion. I think that the way I read it is that the legislature gives the sole discretion to make that decision with the Board of Selectmen. And so that is one of the mandated discretionary things they do. And when that decision is made, I believe our role is to decide whether the amount is reasonable. This is consistent with what has been done in the past. I will not be supporting that. I agree with Linda. I think it's inadvisable to do that, but it's not the Board of Finance's decision to do that. The Board of Selectmen has made that. I will support their right to do that, the amount requested. As your constituent, I think it's inadvisable. So I will
Madam
be
Chair, you're
voting.
saying that the motion is out of order then?
I think it may be. We don't have
a
legal
legal
opinion.
opinion.
It's best practices to probably review our charter. So when was the last time we reviewed it?
7 years ago.
Yeah. So
I don't dispute that. I think it's a good thing to do. It's just like, why would you do it now?
Yeah, I think it's less about optics and just making sure that we're continuously making sure that, I don't know, that we're reviewing if it's been 7 years since the last review, I'd suggest we review it.
Well,
Sure. Yeah.
My understanding is that we are obligated to consider a review of the charter.
Consider.
We put the money in case we were going to open it and wanted to get started on that process. But I think the decision as to whether or not we're going to do that remains with us. And I think we are obligated to consider that decision because we are going to be coming up on that 7 years. But that does not mean that we are necessarily going to undertake. I mean, I think Linda's point is certainly something that we will consider on the Board of Selectmen as to whether we're going to actually go forward. But I think this was put into the budget because we are obligated to consider that. And so we put that in there in
As a
case we did
placeholder.
decide to go forward with it. That's my understanding. Wendy might have a different understanding.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to do it every 7 years, we just have to talk about it every 7 years. I think I would keep it in there. One of the things I brought up last night, I mentioned that this might come up tonight and, for discussion. And we are gonna be looking for a new town manager, and that could be part of the conversation that there may be change of some sort in the job, or if the Board of Selectmen decides to take up, if the option was to do a chief administrative officer versus that. So at least tell the person that's coming in that the charter revision could be happening in the next year or two as part of the conversation that we have. And it wouldn't really start, it may not start till the person's on board, but there's a lot of changes that people feel strongly about. So
But that's exactly my concern, is that by the time you get around to having the charter commission formed and populated and go, because I was on it once, it took
Yeah.
a year to do the
it's
whole
like
process.
over 2 years, yeah.
That, and it wouldn't start until after July sometime, and probably later than that. because-
I had talked with Maria and the attorney that we should start it with, at the organizational meeting with the new board, so that it's from the new board through through their term, because if it takes 2 years, you'd like the consistency of the same board for the charter revision,
Right.
so that's probably when it would start.
But I thought I just heard you say that the idea of having a new town manager.
Would know that it's a potential that's coming.
And wouldn't that kind of discourage?
I don't know.
We have not, as a board, I don't believe this, we have
You
not
haven't
had
decided
this
to
as
do
an
it.
agenda item and discussed this in open session. So I think it's premature we put this money in the budget because we knew
As a
that this was the
placeholder.
time that we needed to consider this. And it's up to us to discuss and decide whether or not we want to open up the charter and do the review. We may not do that, but we haven't had that agenda item come before us to discuss
So
yet.
there are two things our board can do in this situation. we could fund it, and I do recommend that we fund it, because otherwise we would have to do a supplemental appropriation. I'm vehemently against doing that when we don't have to. I'm fairly certain and fairly confident that this decision is wholly within the responsibility of the Board of Selectmen, and our job is just to determine whether the request for the funding of it is reasonable. This is clearly a reasonable amount. It's consistent with what has been asked in the past. As your constituent, I think it's inadvisable to do that and try and hire someone at the same time, but that's not my decision. That's your decision. And so I think we should fund it and leave it up to you as the town's elected officials to use your best judgment as to when and whether to go forward. So I will not support.
Is the question, is the motion not to do the study or to take the money away from
It would be to remove
the
it,
funding.
and will require 4 votes to do that. So we have a motion
In a second.
and a second.
Right.
Is there any further discussion?
I think this is, it appears this is the Board of Selectmen's decision to proceed. And they intend to proceed, and so I guess it's premature to take their money away from them for it, in my view.
But if we do, and they do decide to go forward, they can come to us
Right.
with a supplemental appropriation, and
And
we
it's
can give
not
them the
built
money
into the
then.
budget.
So,
Well, so this is
We
being
don't-
used with
this is-
ARPA dollars, so it's not going to impact the mill rate, so
No.
I'm okay with that.
Everything.
With the supplemental, you mean?
With the,
Coming back to us.
right, supplemental would go against the total amount. This is within their purview. This is something they're required by law to consider. It is a reasonable amount. It's not going to impact the mill rate. It is up to them to make that decision or not, whether to proceed. The decision can be, we're not going to do anything right now, or no, we're going to go full out, or we're going to hire the town manager to evaluate it. I think, but that's sort of, they'll be judged by the public as to whether they made the right decision, as they should be, and as they're appropriately charged by the state legislature. So I would not recommend removing it at this point.
And we're saying that if it came as a supplemental appropriation, we really wouldn't have a choice but
We would
to
not.
approve
We
it.
would have to approve it, and it would count against the supplemental appropriation. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me not to approve it at this point. If they don't spend it, it reverts back to the capital reserve fund. So it's
All right, I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I'd like to ask that we look at the impact. Do you have anything else?
No. I was
That
gonna
would be
just-
to get a preview of where we are.
I'd like to get, a preview of where we are and see if there's more that needs to be done.
Amy, do you need a second to pull that?
I've been doing it as you all have been talking.
Oh,
You were talking before about potential grants that they haven't come to our board yet, but if I know of one that may come to our board this year, would you?
Well, so it would have to be reasonably anticipated to the point that we could budget for it, so it haven't been applied for, or you don't know, and it isn't a high likelihood, we don't need to know it at this point.
There's a likelihood that we're gonna get it, it's not a lot of money, but.
Can you
nothing-
share
no-
with the board so we
Yeah,
understand
so
what's
it's
being
a
discussed?
agricultural grant for the community farm. There's work that needs to be done, and we're working on that. We've brought the MOU to the board, I think it was a couple weeks ago, to finalize that, so that the state, the Department of Ag, kind of oversees a lot of the activities at the community farm, and make sure that the organic farmers that are there can continue, that we're under Gifts of Love, but that can continue. But there's still a lot of things going on. Gifts of Love have to be disconnected, and then this, but there's an agricultural grant, viability grant that they've given before to Gifts of Love to do enhancements at the farm, and that's kind of been thrown out a couple times because we're getting into this pseudo partnership that there might be money available up to $50,000, but we have not applied for it. It's just been talked about as something that could be very possible.
What is the amount?
50.
Up to 50.
Up to 50.
So we can accommodate that as a supplemental without.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that.
I not say it.
No, thank you,
thank
we appreciate that.
I used to sit on that board, and we depended on that money every year. So when I was there, and I
Okay,
don't think we had any trouble getting it either.
Amy, where are we?
So with your changes as of right now, the mill rate for the town would be 30.82. With the fire district, it would be 31.82. And then the median home impact would be an increase of $415 or 5.18%.
And Amy, is that assuming a 27.7% increase in value? And can you show us the impact, 350, 450?
Just give me a second.
So that's bringing from a 5.95% median increase down to a 5.18.
595 to 518.
Yes.
It was at 595, I thought it was
was.
5.6 or 7.
Well, Board of Selectmen, town manager started at 5.95, Board of Selectmen brought it, I don't know where it was, but the letter we sent out based on the budget we previewed on April 4th, it was 5.95. So we brought it down substantially.
Yes.
And giving credit to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education who helped contribute to that as well. And the Director of Finance who went through multiple scenarios with us and gave tremendous guidance.
Okay.
So you'll see the home value there, Amy put in, we went a little bit more granular as to what the median value increase was at certain price points. So you'll see there 28, 27, 26, and 37, how that varies. But Amy, if you change them all to 27.7, which is the median value increase, we've gotten those way down. So, it's not perfect, but I do want to commend this board, staff, and the boards of selectmen and education. It's not a perfect budget, but I think we're at the point where it's reasonable to put it to the public, and let's get some input and see what they think. We know next year is going to be hard. We've laid the gauntlet over the summer, some real hard capital work. $5 million. These are not little numbers that we expect to disappear next year. So we're going to start to bring those numbers down in the out years. We're going to hope we'll get better some assumptions. Amy, in the out years, some of her assumptions has higher inflation. We're already seeing that come down. It's still going to be hard years to come, but we should be able to slowly get that down, but it's going to require all points contribution on that. But I am comfortable with that.
Can I just clarify one thing about these numbers? The home values on the left, are those the values before the revaluation or after?
They're before the revaluation, and then with the revaluation, those are the adjusted home values.
Okay,
So that we're comparing like apples to apples from year to year.
exactly.
And that's the market value, not the
Yes.
assessed value.
Can you go back to the top, Amy? I just want to see that top chart again, so where you can see the percentage increases.
Maybe before we even go any further, I assume that the changes we made still keep us beneath the cap, municipal cap. Okay, just want to double check that. But for our clerk, let the record reflect, the Director of Finance confirm that.
And then can you go to the mill rate increases over the next 4 to 5 years, please? Based on those new valuations, the revals that everybody got. So you see, in that fourth year, you're butting up against a 40 mill rate again on your newly revalued house at 27% higher than what it was last year.
So what we're hoping, if you remember, Amy did a scenario where we changed some of the inflationary numbers, and we were able to get that down into the 400 range. Some of the savings we are incorporating this year will carry forward in the next few years, and if we reduce $5 million in bonding next year, those numbers will come down significantly as well. So that's how part of the strategy we're going to have to use going forward, is to get our capital investment way down, which is, I'm not going to tell you that's great, because you do need to do capital investments, but when your operating is putting pressure on you, and we know that it will, based on the position requests we're seeing both in enrollment and population increases. The only thing that's gonna be able to give is capital, and we're gonna have to give big. So,
So Amy, I have a question. If you can go back to the 5.18% average increase in taxes, what would it take in terms of further budget reductions to get that number into the 4 range rather than the 5 range, down below 5?
Let me see. If you did another 200,000, you'd get it to 4.97.
So I'm going to make Susan want to throw darts at me.
I don't throw darts.
I could break my hand to make it look like yours. You know, Derek said early on that, you know, we did ask the Board of Ed to come in with $750,000 in cuts, and you worked hard and came in with $200,000. And we appreciate that. But I would move that we ask for another $200,000 from the Board of Ed. And at least get ourselves down below the 5%
is there a second?
increase.
I'll second for purposes of discussion.
Amy, what would it be if it was a reduced 100,000? Would that get us below 5?
No.
No,
No.
it's close, but it's not below.
I mean, we took a lot out of the Board of Selectmen. Of course, they didn't come back with as much cuts as we asked. They actually came back with bigger numbers.
It was
But
one.
it's to be sort of not even proportionate. I mean,
What did we end up with as a total dollar reduction to the Board of Selectmen budget?
oh, that's a good question.
I think they were at 475 down to 415
Depends on which budget you start.
Dollars.
Start
of
from.
dollars. Let me see. The
And are we talking about reduction from the Board of Selectmen budget or the Board
I
of
want to
Town
see
Manager's budget?
I want to see what the percentage.
Yeah, but
Derek's
from,
goal
from
was
percentage from
15%.
which one?
No, I want to see what the percentage is that it came in on the Board of Selectmen budget.
On the board, not the town
And that will
manager.
put in perspective whether that 100 or 200,000 is
Is-
even, you
yeah.
know, so.
so just Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
So 31, 679, 391.
679.
679. 91.
Oh, it's not that much.
No.
60,000. I was hoping it'd be more than that.
It was how much, much was it, Amy? I didn't see that
It's
flashback.
like 60,000.
60,000? That's all?
I know, it's
Well, we did a lot of capital.
Yeah.
31.
The majority of your hit was to the debt service.
Well, no.
But you
we-
did cut 100,000 out of positions. I
We
mean,
cut 100,000,
It's a
so it's more
basis
than
point.
that.
Yeah, but then you added
160.
150 for the,
No,
no. That was
that was a
already-
pure 100 cut. Oh, actually, I have it. Hold on.
We added the 100,000 for the contingency.
Yeah, but
No,
that
but
was
that's not an
a,
ad, that's
It's
like
not
an
an ad.
earmark.
yeah, and that, no, that was
That's
a
an
reduction.
Reduction? No, I don't
It was-
mean.
there were
I don't
two
mean- I don't mean
positions
the
at 200.
employment. No, I mean the other contingency.
But that was out of capital reserves, so that was, that should not have. Where's that?
don't have all my, oh,
Reduced the tax increase.
so the board is, I mean, I'm looking at this.
Oh, we did some revenue. We did some revenue adjustments.
Right, a bunch. There's that other page. Yeah, I thought it was 151,000.
That's fine. I'm okay. I mean, I don't need
On your
it unless
thing,
anybody else has a
Lisa,
question.
like 151, wasn't that what you?
Yeah, I don't know where, of course, I've lost that. I don't know what I've done with my thing.
You can look at mine.
Oh, wait, here we go. So, let's see. I think it was between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance. So the Board of Selectmen reduced energy savings 20,000, holiday pay 53,000, vacancy rate 35, debt service 170. The Board of Finance reduced debt service another 150. Vacancy rate, we reduced 15, so that's 185. We reduced 100,000, that's 285. We added 7,000, we reduced the contribution to Simsbury Farms 30, so that's 320, and PD overtime 350, 330 reductions we did. And then we added another 150, 350, because we increased the debt service, so that's 350, 450, it's almost 480 reductions. we did.
480 reductions,
Yeah.
which was offset by the interest rate assumption, or the interest that we were expecting, right, from.
Then we
Yeah.
did some interest
Right.
reduction, revenue increases of about 800, 700 there, and other revenue increases, but then we had to adjust for the motor vehicle. So,
Right, and then we also had to clean up the motions from last time to add the housing authority, so.
we did all that. Some of those were funded, though, by either ARPA or capital reserves, so they didn't impact it. Amy, if it's reduced the Board of Ed by 150,
So that increase was 200.
Gets you to like a little over 5.
so is it worth doing that at this point? I mean, I'm comfortable with where we ended up. I don't think the reduction is significant at this point. I mean, the only thing I would say is if more money comes in from the state, and we do anticipate that there might be some money from the state, to the extent you get extra money, our recommendation, and my very strong recommendation would be, is that money gets used for capital. You gotta pay for those buses.
It's not gonna be our money, it's gonna go to the general fund, so.
It probably will, maybe.
Yeah, so if it does, there will be that money that will come into the general fund that will offset the 150. So at this point, I think that that's probably, I don't know, 70% likely.
Just a note, like, while we didn't meet the number you asked us to reduce by, we started at 9.3. We brought our budget down before we ever came to you, and then brought it down again. So we did a lot of work on our budget.
But there's no doubt, Susan, you know. Yeah. It's not meant as a criticism.
No, but I just, for public discussion, I don't want it to seem like we weren't playing ball, because we really try very hard.
And kudos to you for making reductions in the current year that resulted in $700,000 of savings. And I hate to say it, but that in fact sort of leads me to believe that you could do it again. That if you could save that much last year, you could do it again.
So if we just freeze everything all the time and do, like, that's how we got there. That's not an easy way to operate anything.
So we have, did you
We
make
have
the
a
motion?
motion,
Did
and it was
anyone
seconded.
second it?
Yeah, I did second it.
It was for 200, yeah.
Oh, to reduce the Board of Ed budget by 200?
Yep.
Just to do comparisons, you took did the Board of Ed take out 900,000 and then an additional 2?
No, so they started out at 9 million increase, 9.3 increase. They got it down to a 5, I don't know.
No,
what are we
it's
at?
7.
695.
695.
We came back to you with 6.6?
Yeah, something like that.
6.6.
I'm just trying to do a side-by-side between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed.
Yeah, so we could do that, but they're very different budgets.
They
So
are,
I
yeah.
would just
But
say it's
to
not,
Art's
doesn't make
point-
a sense.
To Art's point, the Board of Selectmen came in with a 25% reduction of their increase. The Board of Ed came in with a 3% reduction of the increase, not their budget, of the increase.
But if you start at the 9 that they started in, they actually remembered, so.
We'd be having much different discussions if there was
Yeah.
a 10%
No.
increase in the Board of Ed budget.
So, well, we have a motion, we have a second. The motion is to reduce the Board of Education budget by 200,000. Does anyone have further discussion before we take that vote? Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm reluctant to cut the Board of Ed budget. I can't identify where those cuts are.
Well, because we don't have that access
Yeah,
to
we don't have that
information.
discretion. And oh my goodness,
We told you that would be student facing, so it's only personnel.
But that's-
Well,
but-
It's
but-
only personnel.
Well, this is not actually,
well, but it has
we're in
been.
discussion,
right?
guys,
Sorry.
discussion among our board, please.
Sorry.
Fair.
Okay. Yeah, my point is that, is to return to the point I made before, that it's simply not sustainable. And we can, I don't know that we want to sort of cut it arbitrarily this year just to get the number more, well, it's not insignificant to get it below 5, but it's not my top priority. But ultimately, if we're cutting $200,000 out of an $82 million budget, I can't do the math in my head
It's tiny.
in terms of what percentage it is, because I didn't go to Simsbury High School. But I can't believe that it would be an equivalent reduction in the quality of the education we're offering. So, I think I'm going to vote against this motion, but next year, if the numbers look like this, I would vote for a bigger cut, and for the same reason. I just think, I know it's a lot to ask, but I believe, essentially, those people are capable of teaching our kids. Well, I'll say that, I'll leave that at that.
Could I just ask, is your view that not to do anything at all or to do a lower number?
What's your question again? What's your question again, Art?
This is 200,000, I'm just wondering.
Art's haggling.
Is he
Yeah.
arguing for a lower number? Just arguing. not
Ask
to-
everybody.
Okay, fine. I withdraw the question.
Well, I would just, again, argue that it is a small, tiny percentage for them. And I think just will make the taxpayers feel a little bit better. 4 sounds better than 5. And we don't have access to the kind of detail that we have with the Board of Selectmen. And I'm in no way meaning to impugn their efforts to do a good budget. But, I mean, I over the years have made suggestions that I've given up on making, but things like, we've got a big plowing budget, which actually went up a lot in the Board of Ed budget this year. Why isn't the DPW doing the plowing rather than contracting that out? Nobody goes to school when the DPW isn't done plowing the roads. So they could plow the parking lots last, and it would be a whole lot cheaper. I think there are things that could be done that are not going to affect the students. And they've just done a bunch of them in the last year. So, I trust that they would find $200,000 out of an $82 million budget. It's not a huge amount to ask.
So I would just say, thank you for everyone's comments. As I say, I love everyone on this board, and even though we don't always agree. I do want to especially state for the public how well-intentioned everyone is on this board, and I appreciate the input. At this point, I view our job as, do we have a budget that's reasonable enough to put to the public, and I think we do. So I'm not going to be supporting the motion at this point, but I think Linda raises an important point. Next year, and Bert, we really have to look hard, and this is going to happen again next year. We need to start thinking where
And the
can we
base will be that much higher.
Well, yes or no? I mean, we'll see.
Well,
But-
yeah, I mean, to that point, again, we want to spend this money on the schools for the sake of the kids who are going to them, but if we price people out of our school system, then we're doing a disservice to some of those people. And we have to take that into consideration. And I don't think that has been adequately clarified in years past. I mean, I haven't been involved in this process for more than 2 years, but I think next year is the time we're really going to have to address that and say, we can provide the best quality education without some of the things that our schools are offering right now. Like, to the point we heard earlier, 40 different languages. Or
40 classes and 38 sports.
I don't think Lori said 40 languages. I hope you did.
5 languages, a lot of classes. But in some, at least some cases, those classes are, I mean, it's a great thing to offer, and I feel like everything I've got is attributable to the quality education I received at someone else's expense. So I want to provide that. But again, we're pricing people out of it if the budget isn't cut. And that's just as much of a consideration.
So let's call a question.
All right, we have a request. I'm sorry, there's one more
I would
comment?
just say, yeah, that I don't think the number's big enough. While I'd be willing to acquiesce a little bit on my original 15% guidance, I think the number has to be an additional 400,000, and that would be 10% of the increase.
So I'm not sure I understand your point. So
I don't think I will not vote for your motion because I don't think the amount is enough.
So do you want to make a friendly amendment to make it a bigger
Well,
amount?
no, I would, but I don't want, I mean,
Or will you propose a bigger amount?
yeah, I would propose an additional 400,000 as opposed to the 200, while coming off my original guidance of 15%, that would make it 10% of the increase. And show the Board of Selectmen as, as the two boards of our town, that they have skin in the game as well, as to the Board of Selectmen who we've made 25% decreases, sorry, I'm distracted. 25% of the increase, the Board
We
of
have a
Selectmen.
motion, a second. We have a friendly amendment.
It's not an amendment, though. So is it?
I believe it is.
I'd like to amend, yeah, I mean, if I may, I'd like to amend the motion to increase the 200 to $400,000.
So who was the second?
Well, you would have to
Oh.
accept it first.
Well, I'll accept it for discussion.
I seconded for discussion, so I'll second this for discussion.
Is there any further discussion on that?
I guess the question in my mind is if you would vote no on 200 and only yes on 400, but if you don't get the 400,
Well,
would you vote?
it's 400
yes
in
on-
addition to the 200 that
You're saying
they've cut.
600?
Well,
Oh,
to what they've already,
Oh.
400
So, yeah.
to what they've already cut.
Right, so, and I'm
Yeah.
proposing 200 in addition to
Yeah.
what they've already
Yeah.
cut. But are you saying that you won't vote for 200, you'll only vote for 400? If you don't get the 400, you wouldn't
Yeah, I
accept a
don't think it's
compromise?
enough, no, I don't think 200 is
So you'd rather
enough.
have no bread than half a loaf?
However you want to discuss it, I'm a steward of 25,000 people in
Yeah.
Simsbury's tax dollars,
okay,
not
so
just.
we have a motion that's been friendly amendment to cut the Board of Education budget by 400,000. It's been accepted by both. Are we ready to call the question?
No, I'd like to.
I'm not
That's
quite.
a new
All right.
situation. I guess, I think 400 is too much. I guess that's my.
Yeah, I agree.
I like two things. One is bringing down this amount of taxes to be paid significantly. And we've done that, and I think we've been responsive to it.
Can't you compromise?
I would like to start the process of making these cuts that we think are impossible, but they're going to happen. I think 400,000 at this point is higher than I would be comfortable with.
What do you think's going to happen next year, Art?
I think it's going to be a very difficult year, and I concur
Yeah,
with your observation.
Yeah.
All right, any other discussion on this at this point?
Well, I agree with Art. I think the 400 is just a little too much. I wish we could do it, but I wish we could compromise. I mean, I'd rather see us get partway to what Derek would like than to completely.
Well, we have a motion, we have
Lose
a
it.
second.
So a point of question, a point of order? I don't know how you word that.
You can just
Kind
ask
of
the question.
parliamentary.
So it's been amended to 400,000. If that fails, can I then go back to the 200,000?
Yes.
Okay,
It's in the motion, yeah.
all right.
Okay.
So,
So we have a motion, we have a second to reduce the Board of Education budget by 400,000. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Okay, let the clerk, for the clerk, we have Mr. Doyle and Mr. Peterson voting aye. Opposed, Mr. Helfand, Mr. House, Ms. Hebner, and Ms. Schofield.
okay.
Are there any other motions?
Yes, so I'll move to reduce the Board of Ed budget by 200,000.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
I think 200,000 is reasonable. It starts this unpleasant process that we've been talking about, and I don't like it. It's painful, but
Yeah.
we're going to have to start this year. We're going to be doing more next year, so I would go with 200,000.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second to reduce the Board of Education budget by 200,000. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 I'll call,
Nay.
okay.
If-
All those
so it fails.
opposed, please say nay. I'm
Nay.
nay. So we've got 3 opposed, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Hebner, and Mr. Helfand are opposed. Those in favor of cutting the budget, who voted aye, were Mr. Doyle, Mr. House, and Ms. Schofield. The motion fails. The Board of Education remains. We're at 5.18%. Are there any other motions? Because I need to take a break. If there are. I mean, we can do more motions, but we are going into
Well, let's take a break
recess.
anyway, because don't you need to then, is there any more modeling or we're, is that
Once
it?
you guys are all set with what your proposal is, I need to do a quality check on the numbers and then draft the motions.
And then we'll eat. We have sandwiches. We'll bring the sandwiches in, but first I have to take a break. So we're going to recess at this point, let Amy do her stuff. There are additional sandwiches, cookies, and chips of people who are here who stayed the whole time. Thank you. You are welcome to also partake in the lovely sandwiches from Fitzgerald's, except for the gluten-free one. And Clifton! Oh, perfect!
That was nice of you, Lisa, to do that.
Yeah,
That
thank
come out
you.
of our budget?
I did not. That's just me. All right, well, we're in
Thank you.
recess.
Recess, come back to order. The chair was called away, so I'm Art House. I'll preside over the rest of the meeting. To understand what we need to do, Amy, I understand that we have it, before we adjourn, the main order of business is to review the FY 23-24 Board of Finance final resolutions and referendum questions and to vote on them.
Yes, so you have 2 documents. You have the resolutions for the bonding, which you're going to make a motion on, and you are, actually, who wants to make the motion, and then I can give you my cheat sheet, and you can read from last year's motions, because you're gonna read into the minutes the full context of the resolution, so that you don't have to read each and every single
God.
one of these.
This is really long.
Yes.
The bond is the first one,
Yes.
The long one.
the long one. So what needs to be, what
So
needs
you're
to be?
reading into the minutes the full text of the resolution, so that was waived, because copies of the resolutions have been
We
provided.
didn't actually, it's a fair
So
point.
I have the actual language if somebody wants to read it.
I'll be happy to do that.
All right.
We'll do it. That's
The chair recognizes Mr. Helfand.
Upon motion duly made, seconded, and adopted, did we actually make that motion?
We're doing it now.
The reading into the minutes of the full text of the resolution set out below, set out in this document, is waived, copies of the resolutions having been made available to those in attendance and recorded in these records immediately preceding these minutes.
Thank you. Well, I'll have a second, and I'll ask Amy to explain what we have.
Yeah, so I think you have to read out all of the projects too, so I think we typically have them do that. So just this first page, you're gonna read each of the projects and then the amount.
I didn't sign on to that. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends and approves the following. Highway pavement management, bonding, 1.1 million. Locksip grant, $156,500. Town aid road grant, $243,500. General fund, $200,000, for a total of $1.7 million. Sidewalk reconstruction, $223,400. Replace elevators, $877,500. Old Drake Hill Road Bridge rehabilitation, $1,989,000. Multi-use trail connections and development consisting of bonding of $279,500. Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Grant, $343,500. Project Savings Fund 523, $184,000, for a total of $873,000. Bridge improvements for Climax Road over Nod Brook, $372,000. Golf course irrigation system at Simsbury Farms, $454,000. Highway plow truck and plow from the general fund, I don't know what OT and VT stand for, $261,000. Meadowwood barn restoration, my colleague's favorite, $650,000. Eno building infrastructure, $389,440. Bridge improvements for Firetown Road and Barn Door Hills. Local Bridge Program grant, $402,500. For the Sewer Use and Assessment Funds, primary clarifier, $1 million. Sewer replacement, $1,075,000. Grit system, $250,000. And finally, for school projects, security improvements of $250,000, and the Tarryville modulars, $500,000.
Amy, is that a typo for grit? Should it be grid?
No, it's grit.
It is grit.
That's what they take out of the
Very
sewage.
good. Going to keep grit taken out of the sewage, I say it makes sense, yeah. And that covers everything that needs to be read, is that correct? All right, we have a motion
we
on the
need to
floor.
vote, yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Discussion? No discussion? All those in favor of the resolution, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
All right, now you have the second page. So you're gonna take each of the motions individually for the first first three questions. And then you're gonna take a motion on the questions for the referendum ballot. There's a backside for setting the referendum. You do not have to do that. The Board of Selectmen will do that.
Okay. So the first would be 1, 2, 3.
I think each paragraph.
Each paragraph.
Each of these
Move that we
Each
would do
paragraph.
the Board of
I
Selectmen.
move that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Selectmen annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $31,679,397.
Second.
Is there discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
I move that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purpose of paying the expenses of the Board of Education annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $81,576,437.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second made by Mr. Doyle. Any discussion? Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there negatives?
Nay.
Nay.
One nay,
Two.
two nays. Records show that Mr. Doyle, Mr. Helfand, Mr. House all voted to approve. Ms. Schofield, Mr. Peterson voted against. Third,
I move that the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of sewer use fund, sewer treatment plant, sewer treatment plant, residential rental properties, Simsbury Farms special programs, non-public schools, debt retirement, capital and capital non-recurring annual budgets for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024 shall be approved and implemented in the amount of $17,149,930.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Schofield. Discussion? Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Unanimous. Should that next paragraph be read into the record?
Yes.
Chair recognizes Mr. Helfand.
That's such a good radio voice, Bert.
I move, in accordance with sections 406 and 808 of the Simsbury Town Charter, that the recommended operating budgets will be submitted to a referendum in the following forms. Do I then read all three questions or one at a time?
All three is fine.
First, shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Selectmen annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, be approved and implemented in the amount of $31,679,397. Second, shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the Board of Education annual budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, be approved and implemented in the amount of $81,576,437. Third, shall the appropriation recommended and approved by the Board of Finance for the purposes of paying the expenses of the sewer use fund, sewer treatment plant, residential rental properties, Simsbury Farms special programs, non-public schools, debt retirement, capital and capital non-recurring annual budgets for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024 be approved and implemented in the amount of $17,149,930.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Doyle. Discussion? Ready to vote? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any nay vote? Noes. Passes unanimously.
Nice job, Bert.
Do we have to set the referendum? No.
Very well. Is there any other business to come before us this evening by any member? Then
We adjourn?
well, I was going to reserve that prerogative, but he can second it. I hear a motion from Schofield to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
You're doing an excellent job. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We adjourn.